Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto reincarnated as son of Beelzebub and got married with Rias Gremory? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. B. Luden legacy fire consumed the village, orange flames licking at wooden buildings as screams echoed through the night. Naruto Uzumaki stood at the center of it all, 9 tails of chakra whipping behind him as he faced an enemy he couldn't quite see, a shadow figure with ringed eyes that seemed to peer into his soul. This isn't enough, the shadow whispered. Even with the power of the 9 tails, you cannot save them all. Blood pooled beneath his feet. The bodies of his friends, Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi, lay scattered around him. He reached out, chakra flaring, but his hand passed through the shadow as though it were smoke. "Who are you?" Naruto demanded, his voice cracking. The figure smiled, revealing teeth like polished obsidian. "I am what comes after. I am what waits beyond the veil. And now, I am you." Naruto woke with a gasp, sweat clinging to his golden skin. His chamber was dark, illuminated only by the soft purple glow of hellfire sconces that never extinguished. For a moment, he was caught between worlds, memories of a hidden leaf village mingling with the reality of obsidian walls and the distant sound of souls in torment. Every night, the dreams came. Remnants of another life, another body, another world. A world where he'd been human, or something close to it. Where he'd housed a demon fox within his soul. How ironic that now he was the demon. "Lord Morningstar," came a voice from beyond his chamber door. "The hour grows late. Your father expects you at council before the gathering of houses." Naruto rolled his shoulders, feeling the phantom sensation of wings wanting to unfurl. "Tell him I'll be there," he called back, his voice deeper than it had been in that other life. "Just need a moment." The servant's footsteps retreated, and Naruto moved to the basin of water beside his bed. He splashed his face, staring at his reflection in the polished silver mirror. Cerulean eyes stared back, unchanged from his former life. 3 whisker marks still adorned each cheek, a curious detail that had carried over in his reincarnation. But now his blonde hair had streaks of crimson at the temples, and when he smiled, his canines were just a touch too sharp. Son of Beelzebub, heir to the Morningstar legacy. The title still felt foreign even after 27 years of existence in this realm. 27 years since he'd awakened as an infant demon with Memo. Rise of a human life bleeding through his dreams. Naruto dressed quickly in the formal attire expected of his station. Black pants and boots, a deep red tunic with intricate gold embroidery, and a cloak that shimmered like oil on water. He'd never been one for ceremonial dress in his previous life, but here, appearances mattered. Politics mattered. The constant dance of power between the great houses of the underworld demanded it. He made his way through the twisting corridors of his father's palace. The architecture never quite followed logical patterns, with staircases that seemed to lead now here only to suddenly open into vast chambers. Naruto had long suspected the structure itself was alive, shifting to accommodate the whims of its master. As he approached the council chambers, Naruto composed himself. No matter how many centuries passed, his father's presence still demanded a certain presentation. The massive doors, etched with scenes of the fall, swung open at his approach. Inside, the council chamber stretched beyond what should have been physically possible. A long obsidian table dominated the center, around which sat the members of House Morningstar's inner circle. And at the head, lounging rather than sitting, was Beelzebub himself. His father looked as he always did, eerily beautiful, with features too perfect to be natural. Like Naruto, he had golden hair, though his lacked the crimson streaks. His eyes shifted color depending on his mood, currently a lazy amber that suggested amusement more than anything else. "Ah, my son finally graces us with his presence," Beelzebub said. His voice like honey over broken glass. "We were just discussing your role at today's gathering." Naruto took his place at the table, nodding respectfully to the other council members. "I wasn't aware I had a specific role beyond standing at your side and looking appropriately intimidating." A few chuckles rose from the table. His father's expression remained unchanged, but there was a glint in his eye that suggested he wasn't entirely displeased with Naruto's irreverence. Traditionally, that would be correct, said Abaddon, his father's chief strategist, a wiry demon with skin like polished onyx. But this gathering is different. House Lucifer has been making moves, consolidating power. There are whispers they seek to challenge the old order. Riasvum grows bold, agreed Lilith, the only female at the table. Her beauty both alluring and terrifying. His agents have been seen in territories belonging to Houses Gremory and Citri. Some say he courts their heirs. Naruto frowned. The balance of power in the underworld depended on the major houses maintaining their territories and spheres of influence. House Lucifer had always been ambitious, but open moves against their great houses would upset centuries of relative peace. And where do I come in? Naruto asked. Beelzebub leaned forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The other houses know of you, of course. My enigmatic son who trains in solitude and appears only rarely at court functions. They know the rumors of your unique abilities. He waved a hand dismissively. But they have not truly seen what you are capable of. Today, perhaps, they should. There it was. His father wanted a demonstration. A reminder to the other houses that the Morningstar legacy included more than just Beelzebub himself. You want me to fight someone, Naruto stated flatly. I want you to make an impression, his father corrected. How you do so is your affair. But know that eyes will be watching, not just those of our allies, but of our rivals as well. House Gremory's heir will be in attendance, along with representatives from all 72 pillars. Naruto nodded, understanding the subtext. The gathering wasn't just a social function, it was a battlefield of a different sort. Every gesture, every word, would be scrutinized and potentially used against them. I won't disappoint you, father, he said. Beelzebub's smile was sharp. You never do, my son. Not in ways that matter. He stood, signaling the end of the council. We depart for the gathering grounds in 1 hour. I suggest you prepare accordingly. As the council dispersed, Naruto remained seated, contemplating what lay ahead. He had attended gatherings before, but always as an observer, standing silently in his father's shadow. This would be different. This would be his debut as a power in his own right. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. A soft cough pulled him from his thoughts. Lilith lingered by the table, her ageless face impossible to read. Your father has great expectations, she said. He always does. He believes the old balance is shifting. New powers are emerging, forces that haven't been seen since the First War. She studied him with eyes that had witnessed the birth of sin itself. He believes you have a greater role to play than even he anticipates. Naruto met her gaze steadily. And what do you believe, Lilith? Her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. I believe that dreams of another life are rarely just dreams, young Morningstar. I believe that when the me soul inhabits different vessels across different realms, the universe itself takes notice. She placed a cool hand on his shoulder. Be careful today. Riasvum is not the only one who will be watching you closely. Before he could question her further, she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of nightshade in her wake. Naruto sighed, rising from his seat. Whatever game was being played, he was clearly a piece on the board rather than a player. But that had been true in his previous life as well, hadn't it? He'd been the Jinchuriki, the weapon, the child of prophecy, always defined by others' expectations. At least this time, he had power of his own. Power that didn't depend on the Nine Tails or anyone else. He flexed his fingers, feeling the familiar tingle of chakra, or what passed for chakra in this realm. It wasn't quite the same energy he'd wielded as a shinobi, but it responded to his will in similar ways. And when combined with the innate demonic power he'd inherited from his father. Well, perhaps today would be interesting after all. The gathering grounds stood at the exact center of the underworld, a neutral territory where the great houses could meet without fear of territorial advantage. The massive Colosseum-like structure was carved from the living rock of the realm itself, with 72 towering pillars representing each of the noble houses surrounding a central arena. House Morningstar's procession arrived with characteristic flair, a cavalcade of nightmare steeds pulling carriages of black glass, heralded by the screaming of invisible banshees. Beelzebub himself rode at the front, his white stallion breathing flames with each snort. Naruto rode beside him on a midnight mare whose hooves left smoking prints upon the ground. As they entered the grounds, Naruto felt the weight of countless eyes upon them. Representatives from every house stood upon their designated pillars, watching the proceedings with varying degrees of interest and hostility. He spotted the distinctive crimson hair of House Gremory immediately. Their pillar stood opposite House Morningstar's, decorated with their sigil of the crimson rose entwined with thorns. Standing at its forefront was a figure that made Naruto pause mid-stride. A young woman with hair the color of fresh blood watched their procession with startling blue-green eyes. She wore a gown of deepest black that contrasted sharply with her pale skin and vibrant hair. Even from this distance, Naruto could sense the power emanating from her, the signature energy of House Gremory, known for their mastery of destruction and rebirth. This must be Rias Gremory, the heir to her house. He'd heard rumors, of course, who hadn't? They said she had refused countless marriage proposals, that she had single-handedly defeated a rogue phoenix, that her beauty was matched only by her intellect. Looking at her now, Naruto could believe at least some of those tales. "I see you've noticed young Rias," his father murmured, voice pitched low enough that only Naruto could hear. "Quite the formidable young woman, by all accounts. Her father and I have had discussions about potential alliances." Naruto tore his gaze away from the Gremory heir. "What kind of alliances?" Beelzebub's smile was enigmatic. "The kind that could shift the balance of power decisively in our favor. But such things cannot be rushed." He straightened in his saddle as they approached the central platform where the rulers of each great house would convene. "For now, observe, learn the currents of power that flow through this gathering. And when the moment presents itself, show them why the blood of Morningstar runs strong in your veins." With that cryptic advice, his father dismounted and moved to take his place among the other rulers. Naruto was left to join the heirs and representatives of each house in the lower circle. As was tradition, the heirs mingled before the formal proceedings began, a chance for the next genera to form their own alliances and rivalries away from their parents' direct oversight. Naruto found himself approached almost immediately by several minor house representatives, all eager to curry favor with the son of Beelzebub. He fielded their questions and compliments with practiced ease, keeping his responses vague and noncommittal. His attention, however, kept drifting toward the crimson-haired woman who stood somewhat apart from the others, engaged in conversation with a young man with silver hair and a calculating expression. "That's Raizvim's son," said a voice at his elbow. Naruto turned to find a tall, elegant demon with deep blue hair and eyes like chips of ice. The sigil of House Citri was embroidered on his formal tunic. "Ajuka Citri," the demon introduced himself with a slight bow. "We've never been formally introduced, Lord Morningstar, though I've heard much about you." "All good things, I hope," Naruto replied with a wry smile. "Interesting things," Ajuka corrected, his expression remaining neutral. "They say you train in techniques unknown to demonkind. That you can create copies of yourself that aren't mere illusions. That you can harness energy that isn't purely demonic in nature." Naruto kept his expression carefully blank. Rumors tend to grow more fantastic with each telling. Indeed, Ajuka sipped from a goblet of something that smoked faintly. Tea is the rumors that House Lucifer seeks to upset the balance of power have likely been exaggerated. And yet here you are, warning me about Raizvim's son. Ajuka's lips quirked in what might have been amusement. "A warning? No, merely an observation. Valley Lucifer is ambitious, talented, and utterly devoted to his house's advancement. Much like his father." He nodded toward where Valley still conversed with Rias. "He's been pursuing an alliance with House Gremory for months. Some say through marriage." Something unexpectedly sharp twisted in Naruto's chest at that. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the political implications. House Lucifer allied with House Gremory would shift the power balance significantly, he noted. "Precisely. Though I'm not convinced Lady Rias is as receptive to his advances as he might hope." Ajuka's gaze moved past Naruto to something beyond. "Ah, speaking of power shifts, it appears the formal proceedings are about to begin. If you'll excuse me, Lord Morningstar." As Ajuka moved away, Naruto felt a prickling sensation at the base of his skull, the same warning sense that had saved his life countless times in his previous existence. Someone was watching him with intent. He turned slowly, scanning the crowd, and found himself looking directly into the blue-green eyes of Rias Gremory. She had disengaged from her conversation with Valley and was now studying Naruto with undisguised curiosity. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. Before Naruto could respond, a thunderous boom echoed through the gathering grounds, signaling the start of the formal proceedings. All eyes turned to the central platform where the rulers of the great houses had assembled. The gathering had officially begun. The formal proceedings of the gathering were, as always, a careful dance of power and diplomacy. Each great house presented its grievances, announced its accomplishments, and reaffirmed its territorial boundaries. Smaller houses pledged fealty to their patrons. Disputes were raised and, in some cases, settled through ritualistic challenges. Naruto observed from his designated place among the heirs, noting the subtle shifts in allegiance, the careful wording of pledges, the meaningful glances exchanged between representatives. Politics in the underworld was a deadly serious game, with consequences that could last centuries. He was not surprised when House Lucifer, represented by Riasvum himself, used its time to subtly threaten the current balance of power. Riasvum, tall and aristocratic with silver hair and a perpetual smirk, spoke of necessary evolution and adapting to changing circumstances. The old ways have served us well, he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the arena. But we must acknowledge that power shifts. New bloodlines emerge, old ones diminish. His gaze flickered briefly toward Beelzebub. House Lucifer proposes a council of reformation to assess the current distribution of territories and responsibilities among the great houses. A murmur ran through the assembly. What Riasvum proposed was nothing short of a complete restructure. Ring of underworld politics, with House Lucifer undoubtedly positioning itself to gain advantage. Beelzebub rose when it was House Morningstar's turn to speak. Unlike Riasvum's flowery rhetoric, his Theirs address was brief and to the point. House Morningstar sees no need for reformation, he stated flatly. The current balance has maintained peace for 3 millennia. Those who seek to disturb it should consider carefully what chaos they might unleash. His amber eyes swept the assembly. As a demonstration of our commitment to strength and tradition, my son will participate in the trial of champions this day. Naruto barely managed to keep his expression neutral. The trial of champions was an ancient tradition where houses could put forward their strongest warriors to compete in tests of skill and power. It wasn't often practiced anymore. Most houses preferred to settle disputes through politics rather than combat, but it remained a valid way to demonstrate a house's strength. And Hi's father had just volunteered him without warning. As the formal speeches concluded, the assembly broke for a period of informal mingling before the trial would begin. Naruto immediately sought out his father, finding him in conversation with Lord Gremory, a distinguished demon with the same crimson hair as his daughter. "Father," Naruto said, keeping his voice level despite his irritation. "A word, if I may." Beelzebub smiled pleasantly. "Ah, Naruto. Lord Gremory and I were just discussing your participation in the trial. He's quite interested to see what the heir to House Morningstar is capable of." Lord Gremory inclined his head. "Indeed, it's been some time since the trial was invoked. A return to older traditions is refreshing in these uncertain times." Naruto recognized the political game being played. He couldn't show anger or surprise without undermining his father's position. "I look forward to representing our house," he said smoothly. "Though I admit, the announcement came as something of a surprise." "The best tests often do," Beelzebub replied, his eyes glinting with warning. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Lord Gremory and I have matters to discuss before the trial begins." Dismissed like a child, Naruto had no choice but to withdraw. He made his way to the preparation area designated for trial participants, his mind racing. The trial of champions wasn't a simple combat exhibition. It was a series of challenges designed to test different aspects of a demon's power. Without knowing what specific trials awaited, preparation was difficult. As he entered the preparation chamber, a circular room lined with weapons and mystical artifacts, Naruto discovered he wasn't alone. Valley Lucifer stood at the center, already dressed in the traditional combat attire of his Ho's silver armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "So, the mysterious son of Beelzebub finally steps into the light, Valley said, turning to face him. Up close, his resemblance to Rias Gremory was striking. The same silver hair and sharp features, though his eyes held a hunger that his father's calculated gaze lacked. I was beginning to think you were just a rumor invented to make House Morningstar seem more formidable. Disappointed, Naruto asked mildly, moving to inspect the available weapons. He wouldn't use them. He preferred to rely on his own techniques, but it gave him some thing to do besides engage with Valley's obvious attempt at provocation. Intrigued, Valley corrected. They say you fight unlike any demon born to the underworld. That you use techniques from elsewhere. His eyes narrowed. I've always enjoyed testing myself against unique opponents. You're participating in the trial as well, then. Valley's smile was predatory. Of course. My father saw the RT Unity as soon as yours announced your participation. House Lucifer against House Morningstar, a classic confrontation. So that was the game. His father had volunteered him, knowing that Rias Gremory would put forward Valley in response. A proxy battle between the houses, with the next generation as pawns. May the best demon win, Naruto said neutrally. Oh, I intend to. Valley turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. By the way, I should warn you, there may be some unexpected elements to today's trial. My father has been working with the trial masters to ensure it properly tests our generation's capabilities. With that cryptic warning, Valley departed, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts. He closed his eyes, centering himself the way he'd been taught in his previous life. The memories of chakra control exercises came easily, focusing energy to specific points in his body, balancing it, directing its flow. In this form, his energy was different, demonic power mixed with what he could only describe as echoes of chakra, but the principles remained the same. Naruto extended his senses outward, feeling the ebb and flow of power throughout the gathering grounds. The concentrated demonic energy of so many powerful entities in one place created a tapestry of sensation, different signatures interweaving and sometimes clashing. And among them, approaching the preparation chamber, a presence that felt like crimson flames and midnight roses. Naruto opened his eyes just as Rias Gremory entered. She moved with confident grace, her formal gown now replaced with a more practical outfit of black leather and crimson silk. Up close, her beauty was even more striking, perfect features framed by that remarkable hair, eyes that held both intelligence and power. Lord Morningstar, she said, her voice melodious but direct. I hope I'm not interrupting your preparations. Naruto straightened, giving her a slight bow. Lady Gremory, not at all, though I admit I'm curious what brings you here. Curiosity itself, in part. She moved further into the chamber, studying him with those penetrating eyes. And perhaps a warning. Valley Lucifer doesn't fight fair, especially when his father has political capital invested in the outcome. I gathered as much from our brief conversation, Naruto replied. But I appreciate the warning nonetheless. Rias circled him slowly, her gaze assessing. You're not what I expected. The whispers about Beelzebub's son paint you as either a reclusive scholar or a battle-hungry berserker. You seem neither. Rumors rarely capture reality. Indeed. She stopped her circuit, facing him directly. They say you came from somewhere else. That you weren't born to the underworld but arrived somehow. That you remember another life. Naruto kept his expression carefully neutral. Few knew the truth of his reincarnation. His father had kept the circumstances of his birth deliberately vague. That Rias knew even rumors suggested she had access to remarkably well-informed sources. People say many things about those born to great houses, he deflected. They do, she agreed. They say I destroyed a phoenix when I was 12. That I can see the moment of a person's death when I look into their eyes. That I've rejected 72 suitors, one from each of the pillars. Her lips curved in a small smile. Only one of those is true. Despite himself, Naruto found himself smiling in response. Let me guess, the phoenix. Her laugh was unexpected and genuine. Good guess, but no. Though I did singe its feathers rather badly. She sobered quickly. The trial begins soon. I should let you prepare. But I wanted to meet you properly first, away from our father's political maneuvering. And what have you concluded from our meeting, Lady Gremory? She considered him for a long moment. That there's more to the son of Beelzebub than meets the eye. And that today's trial will be more significant than either of our fathers anticipate. She turned to leave, then glanced back over her shoulder. My friends call me Rias. Naruto, he offered in return. Her smile warmed a few degrees. Good luck in the trial, Naruto. I think you'll need it. As she left, Naruto found himself staring after her, an odd sensation settling in his chest. It wasn't just physical attraction, though she was undeniably beautiful. There was something about her directness, her confidence, that reminded him of people he'd known in his previous life. People who had seen beyond his status as a Jinchuriki to the person beneath. He didn't have long to dwell on the encounter. A gong sounded, signaling that participants in the trial should make their way to the arena. Whatever tests awaited, whatever political games were being played, Naruto knew one thing for certain: today would mark a turning point. The son of Beelzebub was about to show the underworld exactly what he was capable of. The arena floor had been transformed for the trial of champions. What had been a simple expanse of obsidian was now a complex landscape of different terrains, a section of roiling lava, a field of razor-sharp crystal formations, a dark forest with trees that seemed to move of their own accord, and at the center, a raised platform of white marble. The 72 pillars surrounding the arena were filled with spectators, the air thick with anticipation. On a special platform sat the rulers of the great houses, including Beelzebub and Riasvim, along with the heirs who were not participating in the trial. Naruto spotted Rias seated beside her father, her crimson hair unmistakable even at a distance. She wasn't looking at the arena but at something to the side. Following her gaze, Naruto saw several robed figures conferring near what appeared to be a sealed obsidian container. The trial masters, presumably champions, approach, boomed a voice that seemed to come from the air itself. Naruto stepped forward onto the arena floor. Across from him, Valley did the same. To his surprise, several other participants also emerged, 3 demons he didn't recognize, representing minor houses. It seemed the trial had attracted more interest than just the proxy battle between Morningstar and Lucifer. The lead trial master, a gaunt demon with parchment-like skin and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow, raised his hands for silence. The trial of champions is an ancient tradition, he intoned, a test of power, skill, and cunning. Today's trial will consist of 3 challenges. He gestured to the transformed arena. First, the terrain trial. Champions must cross each Elementa L territory while facing the guardians within. Second, the duel of shadows. Champions will face manifestations of their own weaknesses. And finally, the crucible of power, a direct contest between the remaining champions. Murmurs ran through the crowd. The first 2 challenges were traditional, but the third, a direct confrontation between champions, was unusual. Typically, the trial ended with champions facing manifestations of ancient demons, not each other. Naruto's eyes narrowed. This change had Riasvim's influence written all over it. Champions, take your positions at the entry points to your assigned terrains. The trial master continued. When the gong sounds, the trial begins. May your houses find honor in your performance. Naruto was directed to begin with the crystal field, Valley with the lava section, and the other 3 champions to the forest. As he took his position, Naruto gathered his energy, feeling it flow through his body, part chakra, part demonic power, a fusion that was uniquely his. The gong sounded, and the trial began. Naruto entered the crystal field cautiously. The formations jutted from the ground like massive transparent blades, some taller than he was. E-light refracted through them in unnatural ways, creating disorienting prismatic effects that made depth perception difficult. He had taken no more than 10 steps when the first guardian appeared, humanoid construct made entirely of living crystal, its faceted body glinting as it lumbered toward him. Naruto dodged its first swing, noting how its arm extended unnaturally, the crystal flowing like liquid before hardening again. The traditional approach would be to counter with demonic fire or destructive energy. But Naruto had never been one for traditional approaches. He formed a familiar hand sign, chakra flowing through his fingers. Shadow clone jutsu, he murmured. 5 perfect copies of himself appeared in puffs of smoke, surrounding the crystal guardian. The crowd gasped audibly. Most demons could create illusions, But physical duplicates with independent consciousness were unheard of. The clones attacked in perfect coordination, a tactic Naruto had perfected in his previous life. While the Guardian struggled to track multiple targets, Naruto himself focused on forming his next technique. In his palm, a sphere of swirling energy took shape, not quite the Rasengan of his past, but something similar. Infused with his demonic power. When the Guardian turned its back to swipe at one of his clones, Naruto struck. The spiraling sphere slammed into the crystal being's center, initially seeming to do nothing. Then cracks spread outward from the point of impact, the conflicting rotational energies shattering the Guardian from within. The crystal construct collapsed into a pile of gleaming shards. Without pausing to acknowledge the murmurs from the crowd, Naruto pressed forward. 2 more Guardians emerged from the crystal formations, larger than the first. His clones engaged them while Naruto himself navigated the increasingly treacherous terrain, crystal spikes erupting from the ground with each step. Across the arena, he glimpsed Valley battling fire elementals in the lava field. The heir to house Lucifer surrounded by a nimbus of silver energy as he dispatched his opponents with efficient brutality. The 3 minor house champions were struggling in the forest, 1A. Already eliminated by what appeared to be animated vines that had wrapped around his throat. Naruto refocused on his own challenge. The remaining Crystal Guardians had adapted to his tactics, their bodies now vibrating at a frequency that shattered his clones on contact. Time to try something different. He summoned his demonic power, feeling it surge through his body in a way that was both familiar and foreign. In his previous life, he'd accessed the 9 Tails chakra when in need. Now, he could call upon his birthright as Beelzebub's son. Crimson energy crackled around his form, and he felt his canines elongate slightly. His whisker marks darkening. With inhuman speed, Naruto flashed between the Crystal Guardians. Where his hands touched their forms, the crystal blackened and cracked, demonic energy corrupting their very structure. Within seconds, both Guardians collapsed, their remains dissolving into glittering dust. The path to the central marble platform was clear. Naruto sprinted forward, aware that Valley had also dispatched his final Guardian and was converging on the same destination. They reached the platform simultaneously, locked eyes for a brief moment, then turned to face the next challenge. The second trial, the Duel of Shadows, was more psychological than physical. As Naruto stepped onto the marble platform, the world around him seemed to blur and shift. The roar of the crowd faded to silence. Even Valley, standing mere feet away, grew indistinct, as though viewed through frosted glass. Then a figure took shape before Naruto, coalescing from shadows and memory. It wore an orange and black jumpsuit, had bright blonde hair, and bore whisker marks on its cheeks. But its eyes were wrong, cold and empty where they should have been full of determination. It was him, or rather, who he had been in his previous life. "You forgot us," the shadow Naruto said, its voice echoing strangely. "You left them all behind. Sakura, Sasuke, Kakashi, Hinata, everyone who believed in you." Naruto had been warned about this trial. The shadow would use his own doubts and fears against him, attempting to paralyze him with guilt or regret. "I didn't choose to leave," he replied steadily. "Death claimed me. Rebirth brought me here." The shadow laughed, a hollow sound. "You could have fought harder. You could have found a way back. Instead, you embraced this new existence. Son of Beelzebub, heir to Hell's throne, you enjoy the power, don't you?" So different from the orphan boy nobody wanted. Despite knowing the psychological nature of the trial, Naruto felt the words strike home. It was true that part of him had embraced this new life, had relished the respect and power that came with his position. Was that wrong? Was it a betrayal of who he had been? The shadow pressed its advantage, shifting its appearance. Now it looked like Naruto in his current form, but with corrupted features, eyes like burning coals, skin cracked to reveal hellfire beneath. "This is what you're becoming," it hissed. "Not a protector, but a destroyer. Not a uniter, but a conqueror. Beelzebub's true son." Naruto closed his eyes, centering himself. The shadow was pulling from his own insecurities. Yes, but that didn't make its words truth. He had carried his core values with him across lifetimes. The circumstances had changed, but his essence remained. "You're right and wrong," Naruto said, opening his eyes to face his shadow self. I am Beelzebub's son. I do possess power that would have been unimaginable in my previous life. But power isn't inherently corrupt, it's how you use it that matters. He took a step forward, and the shadow took a corresponding step back. In my previous life, I was Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox. I fought to protect my friends, to bring peace, to be acknowledged. Another step. In this life, I am Naruto Morningstar, son of Beelzebub. My methods may change, my powers may be different, but my heart remains the same. The shadow snarled, its form fluctuating between his past and present selves. Pretty words. But when the moment comes to choose between power and principle, between your father's path and your former self's beliefs, what then, son of Beelzebub? Naruto smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it, the same smile that had won over enemies and friends alike in his previous existence. Then I'll find my own path, just like I always have. He lunged forward, hand outstretched. The shadow tried to dodge, but Naruto had anticipated the movement. His fingers closed around what felt like cold smoke, and he channeled his unique energy, not purely demonic, not purely chakra, but the fusion that was his alone. The shadow writhed, then suddenly stilled. Its features shifted one final time, settling into a perfect mirror of Naruto's current form. But with a subtle difference, this version's eyes held the same determined clarity that had characterized Naruto Uzumaki. Well done, the shadow said, its voice no longer hostile. You have faced your duality and found harmony rather than conflict. The trial is past. The shadow dissolved, and the world around Naruto snapped back into focus. The roar of the crowd returned, along with the sight of the arena. Across the platform, Valley was emerging from his own shadow duel, his expression grim but triumphant. Of the three minor house champions, only one remained. A slender demon with scales instead of skin who looked shaken but determined. The lead trial master approached the platform. 3 champions have passed the second trial. Now comes the crucible of power, champion against champion. Until only one remains standing. He looked between them. This is not a duel to the death, but neither is it a mere exhibition. You fight until your opponent yields or is rendered incapable of continuing. Naruto's eyes narrowed. This deviation from traditional trials felt increasingly suspicious. The first match, the trial master announced, Valley Lucifer against Syrax of House Naberius. Valley's smile was predatory as he faced the scaled demon. The match was brief and brutal. Syrax fought well, his scales deflecting Valley's initial attacks, but the heir to Ho's Lucifer eventually broke through his defenses with a concentrated blast of silver energy that left Syrax unconscious on the marble. As healers removed the fallen champion, Valley turned to Naruto, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. And now, the trial master intoned, the final match of the crucible. Valley Lucifer against Naruto Morningstar. A hush fell over the arena as the two heirs faced each other. This was what the crowd had been waiting for, what Riasvam and, perhaps, Beelzebub had engineered. A direct confrontation between the next generation of two great houses. I've been looking forward to this, Valley said. His voice pitched for Naruto's ears alone. A chance to test myself against the mysterious techniques of Beelzebub's son. Happy to oblige, Naruto replied, settling into a ready stance. Though I suspect this match means something different to you than it does to me. Valley's power began to manifest around him, silver energy crackling like lightning across his form. Oh, and what does it mean to you? Naruto Morningstar. Naruto smiled, allowing his own energy to rise in response, golden with threads of crimson woven throughout. A chance to show the underworld that the old ways aren't the only ways. That power can take many forms. Begin. The trial master commanded, quickly retreating from the platform. Valley moved first, closing the distance between them with blinding speed. His attack pattern was complex and unpredictable, a kick that transitioned into an elbow strike, followed by a blast of concentrated energy. Naruto evaded the physical attacks and met the energy blast with one of his own. The collision creating a shockwave that rippled across the arena. He countered with a series of swift strikes, testing Valley's defenses while conserving his own power. They separated, circling each other. Naruto could sense the calculating intelligence behind Valley's aggressive style. The heir to House Lucifer wasn't just powerful, he was skilled, constantly analyzing and adapting. Your reputation doesn't do you justice, Valley commented, genuine appreciation in his voice despite the hostility of their encounter. The rumors of your unique abilities weren't exaggerated after all. I could say the same for you, Naruto replied. Though I notice you haven't shown your true power yet. Valley's smile widened. Neither have you. As if by mutual agreement, they escalated simultaneously. Valley's silver aura intensified, his power manifesting as spectral wings that spread from his back. Naruto responded by creating a dozen shadow clones that surrounded Valley in a perfect circle. The crowd gasped as the clones attacked in perfect synchronization, each moving with the same skill and speed as the original. Valley defended admirably, his wings becoming weapons. Hats slashed through several clones, but for each one dispelled, another landed a blow. Frustrated, Valley gathered his power for a massive area attack, silver energy condensing between his palms. Enough games, he snarled, releasing the blast in a circular wave that destroyed all remaining clones. But Naruto was no longer among them. From above, having leapt high while Valley was distracted, Naruto descended with a spiraling sphere of energy in each hand, one golden, one crimson. Dual spiral impact, he called, driving both spheres toward Valley's shoulders. Valley managed to deflect one with a hastily raised shield of energy. But the second connected, sending him skidding across the platform. He recovered quickly, eyes now glowing with silver light. Interesting, he said, rolling his shoulder where the attack had landed. Not purely demonic energy, something else mixed in, something older. His expression turned serious. I think it's time I showed you what the heir to House Lucifer is truly capable of. The air around Valley distorted, pressure building as he accessed deeper reserves of power. Silver light gave way to white, so bright it was almost painful to look at. His form began to change, skin hardening into scales, fingers extending into talons, divine dividing, he intoned, and massive wings of pure light erupted from his back, each feather gleaming like polished steel. My sacred gear, passed down through the Lucifer bloodline. With it, I can have my opponent's power and add it to my own. This was unexpected. Sacred gears were rare artifacts of immense power, often tied to specific bloodlines. That Valley possessed one explained much about House Lucifer's confidence. Naruto had little time to consider the implications as Valley launched himself forward with newfound speed. The fight became a blur of movement, Valley's enhanced abilities making him a far more dangerous opponent. Each time his wings touched Naruto, he could feel a portion of his energy being drained away. It was time to reveal his own trump card. Naruto leapt back, creating distance between them. Then he closed his eyes, reaching deep within himself to the core of his being where memories of Aneth. Life intertwined with his current existence. There, in that liminal space between what was and what is, he found what he sought. Golden energy erupted around him, forming a cloak that flickered like flames. 9 distinct tails of energy manifested behind him, swaying with a life of their own. His whisker marks darkened and elongated, and when he opened his eyes, they had shifted from blue to crimson with slitted pupils. What is this? Valley demanded, his confident expression faltering slightly. This isn't demonic energy. No, Naruto agreed, his voice carrying a subtle echo. It's something from before, something I carried with me across death and rebirth. You have your sacred gear, Valley Lucifer. I have the echo of the 9-tailed fox. The crowd had fallen completely silent, all eyes fixed on the transformed combatants. On the ruler's platform, Beelzebub leaned forward with interest while Riasvim's expression darkened. What followed was combat on a level rarely witnessed in the underworld. Valley's sacred gear allowed him to absorb and redirect energy, but Naruto's fox cloak gave him regenerative abilities and raw power that seemed inexhaustible. They clashed again and again, ACH exchange sending shockwaves across the arena, cracking the marble platform beneath their feet. Valley managed to land several significant blows, at one point sending Naruto crashing into one of the crystal formations at the edge of the platform. But Naruto always returned, his injuries healing almost as quickly as they were inflicted. Why won't you stay down? Valley growled in frustration after a particularly brutal exchange. Naruto wiped blood from his mouth, his fox cloak flickering but stable. Because I never give up. That's my ninja way, or it was, in another life. Some things don't change, even across death and rebirth. With renewed determination, Naruto gathered his unique energy into his right hand. Unlike his previous technique, this wasn't a simple spiraling sphere. It was larger, wilder, with what appeared to be four blade-like protrusions spinning around a central core. It howled like a windstorm, the sound filling the arena. Rasenshuriken, Naruto named it, the technique. A perfected version of what he'd wielded in his previous life, now enhanced with his demonic power. Valley's eyes widened at the sheer destructive potential evident in the attack. He gathered his own power in response, the light of his wings intensifying to painful brightness. Vanishing Dragon Balance Breaker, he countered, his sacred gear evolving further, encasing him in armor of white light. They charged at each other, their attacks aimed for a final, decisive clash. The Rasenshuriken screamed through the air as Valley's comet-like form streaked toward Naruto. At the last possible moment, Naruto performed a subtle feint, a shinobi technique from his past life, shifting his trajectory just enough that Valley's charge missed its center mass. The Rasenshuriken connected with Valley's side rather than being met head-on, its spinning blades shredding through the light armor and into the flesh beneath. Valley cried out, his balance breaker faltering as he crashed onto the platform. The Rasenshuriken detonated in a controlled explosion of energy, creating a perfect dome that contained its destructive force rather than endangering the arena. When the light faded, Valley lay on his back, his sacred gear deactivated, blood seeping from numerous wounds. Naruto stood over him, his fox cloak still active but dimmed, one hand extended toward his fallen opponent. "Yield," Naruto said simply. For a moment, it seemed Valley might refuse. His eyes burned with frustrated ambition and wounded pride. But then, perhaps recognizing the genuine respect in Naruto's gesture, he grasped the offered hand. "I yield," he said, loud enough for the trial masters to hear. The lead trial master approached cautiously, clearly awed by the display of power he had witnessed. "The winner of the Trial of Champions," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent arena, "Naruto Morningstar of House Beelzebub." The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, gasps, and excited murmurs. Naruto helped Valley to his feet. S healers rushed forward to tend to the heir of House Lucifer. "This isn't over between us," Valley said quietly as healers surrounded him. "I didn't expect it would be," Naruto replied. As Valley was led away, Naruto turned to face the assembled houses, allowing his fox cloak to fade. He caught sight of his father on the ruler's platform. Beelzebub's expression was unreadable, but he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Next to him, Rias's face was a mask of controlled fury. Whatever outcome the Lord of House Lucifer had expected from this trial, it clearly wasn't this. And there, among the heirs, sat Rias Gremory. Unlike the shocked expressions of those around her, her face showed something different: interest, certainly, but also understanding, as though she had suspected something of his true nature all along. When their eyes met across the distance, she smiled, a small but genuine expression that felt oddly like recognition between kindred spirits. The trial was over, but Naruto knew that in many ways, this was just the beginning. He had revealed capabilities that would raise questions throughout the underworld. His father's political machinations would advance in ways he couldn't fully anticipate. And House Lucifer would not take this defeat lightly. As he left the arena floor, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set in motion events that would change the underworld forever. For better or worse remained to be seen. The aftermath of the trial brought a flurry of activity to the gathering grounds. Representatives from minor houses who had previously ignored Naruto now sought to pay their respects to the victorious heir of House Morningstar. Whispers followed him everywhere, speculation about the nature of his powers, about what his victory meant for the balance between the great houses. Naruto navigated the political currents with practiced ease, accepting congratulations graciously but deflecting questions about his abilities. His father had taught him well in that regard. If nothing else, reveal only what serves your purpose, keep your true capabilities close. He was more concerned about Rias's reaction. The Lord of House Lucifer had left the ruler's platform immediately after the trial concluded, his silver-haired entourage following in his wake. Such a public display of displeasure did not bode well for future relations between their houses. As the formal ceremonies winding down the gathering began, Naruto found himself approached by an unexpected figure, Lord Gremory himself, his crimson hair a stark contrast to his formal black attire. Impressive display, young Morningstar, Lord Gremory said, his voice cultured and measured. It's been some time since the underworld witnessed such unique abilities. Thank you, Lord Gremory. Naruto replied with appropriate deference. The trial was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Indeed, the elder demon studied him with penetrating eyes that reminded Naruto of Rias. My daughter seemed particularly impressed by your performance. She has an eye for exceptional talent. Before Naruto could formulate a response to this seemingly casual observation that clearly carried deeper meaning, Lord Gremory continued, House Morningstar and House Gremory have maintained cordial relations for millennia, but perhaps it's time for something more substantial. I've invited your father to bring you to our territory for a more intimate gathering next week. His smile was polite but calculating. I hope you'll be able to attend. With that, Lord Gremory inclined his head slightly and moved on, leaving Naruto to consider the implications. An invitation to Gremory territory was significant. The crimson-haired house was known for its selectivity in forming alliances. So my father's already making his move, came a familiar voice from behind him. Naruto turned to find Rias standing there, still in her formal attire, her expression amused. I was wondering how long it would take him to suggest bringing you to our estate, she continued. Though I must admit, your performance in the trial likely accelerated his timeline considerably. Your father is direct, Naruto observed. Only when he sees something he wants. Rias moved closer, lowering her voice. House Gremory has always valued power, but power with purpose. You showed both today. And what does Rias Gremory value? Naruto asked, finding himself genuinely curious about the answer. She considered the question seriously. Authenticity, conviction, the courage to forge one's own path. Her gaze was steady. You fought differently than any demon I've ever seen. Not just your techniques, but your approach. There was no cruelty in your victory, no desire to humiliate your opponent. That's unusual in the underworld. Some habits are hard to break, even across lifetimes, Naruto replied, surprised by his own candor. Rias smiled, and this time it reached her eyes fully. I look forward to learning more about these habits of yours. Perhaps during your visit to Gremory territory. Before Naruto could respond, a commotion near the exit tunnels caught their attention. Raised voices echoed across the chamber, followed by a surge of demonic energy that made the air itself seem to waver. What's happening? Rias frowned, turning toward the disturbance. Naruto extended his senses, a technique from his shinobi training that still served him well. Conflict, he said grimly. Lucifer's people and he stiffened as he recognized the signature of the other energy. Your entourage. Without waiting for her response, Naruto moved toward the conflict, Rias close behind. They arrived to find a tense standoff between several silver-haired demons bearing the Lucifer crest and a group wearing the crimson rose of House Gremory. At the center of the confrontation stood Valley, his injuries from the trial healed but his expression dark with lingering anger. Opposite him was a tall, regal Manas with flowing crimson hair who bore a striking resemblance to Rias, her mother, Naruto presumed, or perhaps an older sister. You forget yourself, Valley Lucifer, the Gremory demoness was saying, her voice cold. House Gremory does not respond to threats, veiled or otherwise. It was merely an observation, Lady Venelana, Valley replied, his tone deceptively light. That in these changing times, old alliances may prove insufficient protection. Today's trial demonstrated how quickly fortunes can shift. Venelana, Rias's mother, Naruto now realized, smiled without warmth. Indeed it did, though, perhaps not in the way House Lucifer anticipated. Valley's eyes narrowed dangerously, his power beginning to manifest as a silver aura around his form. The Gremory guards tensed in response, their own power rising to meet the potential threat. Enough. Rias stepped forward, her authority evident in her bearing despite her youth. This is neither the time nor the place for such discussions, Valley. The heir to House Lucifer turned his attention to her, his expression softening fractionally. Rias, I was just expressing concern for House Gremory's well-being. These are uncertain times. Your concern is noted, Rias replied coolly. And unnecessary. Valley's gaze shifted to Naruto, who had positioned himself slightly to Rias's side, ready to intervene if needed. Ah, the champion himself joins us. Come to protect your new allies. Morningstar. Just passing through, Naruto said mildly. Though I couldn't help noticing the excessive energy being thrown around. The gathering has rules about hostile displays. If I recall correctly. Rules. Valley's laugh held no humor. Always hiding behind rules and traditions. But what happens when the rules change? His eyes locked with Naruto's. My father sends his regards, by the way. He was most intrigued by your performance today. The threat behind the words was unmistakable. Give Riasvum my thanks, Naruto replied, maintaining his casual demeanor. It's always nice to be appreciated. For a moment, it seemed Valley might escalate the confrontation further. Then, with visible effort, he reined in his power and stepped back. We'll continue this conversation another time. Under different circumstances, he said, addressing both Naruto and Rias. House Lucifer has plans that will soon come to fruition. It would be beneficial for our House Gremory to consider where its true interests lie when that time comes. With that parting remark, Valley gestured to his entourage, and they departed through one of the exit tunnels, silver energy crackling in their wake. Lady Venilana watched them go, her expression contemplative. That boy has always had more ambition than sense, she murmured. Then, turning to Naruto, she inclined her head slightly. Naruto Morningstar, your performance in the trial was most impressive. I see why my husband is so interested in closer ties between our houses. Thank you, Lady Venilana, Naruto replied with appropriate respect. It's an honor to meet you. Mother, Rias interjected, what was Valley referring to? What plans does House Lucifer have? Venilana's expression grew serious. Nothing to concern yourself with immediately. Riasvum has been making overtures to several of the minor houses, consolidating support. But his loss of face today may accelerate whatever he's planning. She looked between Naruto and Rias. Which makes Lord Gremory's invitation to House Morningstar all the more timely. She turned to go, then paused, glancing back at Naruto with a knowing smile. We look forward to hosting you at our estate. Young Morningstar, I think you'll find House Gremory's hospitality enlightening. As Venilana and her entourage moved away, Rias remained behind, studying Naruto with renewed interest. It seems you've made quite an impression on my family, she observed. Not entirely by design, Naruto admitted. Though I'm beginning to suspect my father had this outcome in mind all along. Rias's laugh was unexpected and genuine. Fathers in the underworld rarely do anything without multiple layers of purpose. Her expression sobered. Valley's threats shouldn't be taken lightly. If Riasvum is planning something significant, then all the more reason for our houses to explore closer relations, Naruto finished. Politics is never simple in the underworld, is it? No, Rias agreed, but that doesn't mean the connections formed through politics can't become genuine. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Until next week, then. I look forward to showing you Gremory territory. With that, she departed, leaving Naruto to contemplate the rapidly shifting landscape of underworld politics, and his own unexpected place within it. As he made his way back to where his father waited, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that the trial had been just the opening move in a much larger game. House Lucifer's ambitions, House Gremory's interest, his father's machinations, all pieces on a board whose full dimensions he was only beginning to comprehend. And then there was Rias herself, intriguing, intelligent, powerful in her own right. Their interaction had felt natural in a way few of his encounters in the underworld ever did. There was something about her that resonated with him, that reminded him of values he'd held in his previous life. Whatever came next, Naruto knew one thing for certain: the gathering had changed everything. The son of Beelzebub had stepped out of the shadows, revealing abilities that defied conventional understanding of demonic power. There would be consequences, some immediate, others long-term. As he reached his father's side and met Beelzebub's calculating amber eyes, Naruto steeled himself for what was to come. He had navigated dangerous waters in his previous life as Naruto Uzumaki. He would do so again as Naruto Morningstar. But this time, he would do it on his own terms. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Chains of Fate. The ancestral grounds of House Gremory stretched before Naruto like a crimson dream. Unlike the obsidian austerity of his father's domain, the Gremory estate embraced a different aesthetic, Gothic spur. Wrapped in flowering vines that bloomed blood-red year-round, sprawling gardens where plants from 100 realms grew in carefully cultivated harmony, and at the center, a vast manor house that aimed to glow with inner warmth despite its imposing size. Naruto stood at the edge of a marble balcony, watching the preparations below for the evening ceremony. Servants scurried about arranging tables and decorations, their efficiency suggesting longtime practice at such events. Occasionally, one would pause to stare at the imposing figure that accompanied Naruto, his father, Beelzebub, who lounged against the balustrade with casual elegance that belied his rank. "Quite the reception they've arranged," his father remarked, amber eyes taking in the spectacle with lazy interest. "House Gremory has always favored ostentation." "It's different," Naruto admitted. "Not as severe as our territory. Our aesthetics reflect our nature, my son." Beelzebub plucked a crimson blossom from a nearby vine, twirling it between his fingers. "House Morningstar embraces the elegant simplicity of darkness. House Gremory prefers to hide its power behind beauty." He crushed the flower, watching dispose neatly as the petals turned to ash in his grip. "Both approaches have their merits." Naruto said nothing. A week had passed since the trial of champions, a week of intensive preparation and political briefings. His father had been unusually forthcoming about his expectations for this visit, a formal alliance between their houses, with the details to be negotiated during their stay. What Beelzebub hadn't explained was why now, after millennia of cordial but distant relations, he suddenly sought closer ties with House Gremory. Naruto suspected it had something to do with Rizvim's increasingly bold moves. But his father rarely revealed all his motivations. "You're troubled," Beelzebub observed, his tone neutral. "Curious," Naruto corrected, "about the timing of this alliance." His father's smile was thin. "You performed admirably at the trial." House Gremory took note. "It's natural they would seek closer ties with the house that produced such a unique heir. And it has nothing to do with whatever Rizvim is planning. Everything in the underworld is connected, my son." Beelzebub turned to face him fully, his perfect features settling into a more serious expression. "House Lucifer grows restless. They speak of reformation, of new orders and broken traditions. Some of the younger houses listen." A shadow passed across his face. "And there are other concerns. Disturbances at the boundaries. Energy fluctuations that shouldn't be possible." Naruto frowned. "The same disturbances Rias mentioned when we spoke at the gathering." "Perhaps." His father looked away, gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the estate grounds. "House Gremory guards one of the ancient sealed temples in their territory. Lord Gremory has reported irregularities in the seal's integrity." "What kind of temple? What's its sealing?" Beelzebub waved a dismissive hand. "Old things. Forgotten gods. Remnants of the time before the great house's established order." His eyes slid back to Naruto, calculating. "During tonight's ceremony, I expect Lady Rias may seek your counsel on the matter. Her father has granted her authority over the investigation." Understanding dawned. "So that's part of this alliance. You want me to help them with their seal problem. I want you to represent House Morningstar's interests while building goodwill with our new allies," his father corrected smoothly. "The act that it allows you to spend time with the Gremory heir is a fortuitous alignment of goals." Before Naruto could press further, a servant appeared at the balcony entrance, bowing deeply. "Lord Beelzebub, Lord Morningstar." The servant intoned, "Lord Gremory requests your presence in the grand salon. The other guests have begun to arrive for the pre-ceremony reception." Beelzebub straightened, his casual demeanor falling away like a discarded cloak, replaced by the regal bearing of one of the underworld's most powerful lords. "We shall attend him shortly," he replied, then turned to Naruto as the servant retreated. "Remember what we discussed, my son. This alliance serves both our houses, but House Morningstar's interests must remain paramount in your considerations." With that, he swept from the balcony, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts. The energy fluctuations, the weakening seals, Rias's interest in his unique abilities, all pieces of a puzzle whose complete picture remained unclear. And now, his father's unusual willingness to form a formal alliance with House Gremory. Something significant was unfolding in the underworld, something that had prompted even Beelzebub to seek allies. Naruto straightened his formal attire, deep burgundy with gold and black accents, the colors of House Morningstar, and followed his father into the manor. Whatever game was being played, He intended to understand the rules before committing to any moves of his own. The grand salon of House Gremory lived up to its name, a vast chamber with soaring ceilings supported by columns of polished marble veined with crimson. Massive chandeliers crafted from what appeared to be crystallized blood droplets, and walls adorned with tapestries depicting the house's storied history. Already, the room was filled with representatives from dozens of noble houses, their varied appearances and energy signatures creating a dizzying tableau of underworld aristocracy. Naruto followed in his father's wake, aware of the speculative glances and whispered conversations their arrival triggered. News of his performance at the trial had spread throughout the underworld, elevating House Morningstar's already formidable reputation. Now, walking through the crowd, he could sense the mixture of curiosity, respect, and wariness his presence evoked. Lord Gremory awaited them near the center of the salon, resplendent in formal attire of deep crimson and black. Beside him stood his wife, Lady Venelana, her beauty as striking as it had been at the gathering. They were engaged in conversation with several other house lords, but broke off as Beelzebub approached. Lord Beelzebub, Gremory greeted, extending his hand in the formal manner of underworld nobility. Your presence honors us. The honor is mutual, Beelzebub replied smoothly. Clasping the offered hand, House Morningstar values the opportunity to strengthen our long-standing friendship. As the lords exchanged pleasantries, Naruto scanned the room, searching for a particular crimson-haired figure. He found her across the salon, surrounded by a small group of younger demons who appeared to be about her age. Rias wore a gown of midnight blue that complemented her hair and complexion perfectly, the garment both elegant and subtly provocative in its design. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, meeting his eyes across the crowded room. A smile curved her lips, and she excused herself from her companions, making her way toward him with graceful purpose. Naruto Morningstar, she greeted as she reached him, extending her hand. Welcome to Gremory territory. He took her offered hand, noting the strength in her delicate fingers. Thank you for the invitation, Lady Rias. Your home is impressive. Please, just Rias. Her smile warmed a degree. And this is merely the public face of our territory. I hope to show you some of its more interesting aspects during your stay. There was something in her tone that suggested more than a simple tour. A hint of shared purpose that aligned with his father's earlier comments. Before he could explore this further, they were interrupted by the arrival of another crimson-haired figure, a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Rias, though his features were more angular and his eyes held a sharper glint. So this is the infamous son of Beelzebub, the newcomer said, appraising Naruto with open curiosity. Your performance at the trial was unexpected. Naruto, this is my brother, Searzex, Rias introduced, a note of fond exasperation in her voice. He's supposed to be circulating among the guests as a representative of our house, but apparently he'd rather interrogate you. Searzex laughed, the sound genuinely warm. Can you blame me? It's not every day someone demonstrates abilities unknown to Demonkind. He extended his hand to Naruto. No offense intended. I'm genuinely impressed. None taken, Naruto replied, shaking the offered hand and noting the control D power that thrummed beneath Searzek's casual demeanor. This was no ordinary air. The energy signature Naruto sensed suggested Searzex might be one of the most powerful demons he'd encountered outside the Great Lords themselves. Your sister mentioned you might have insights into some of the unusual energy fluctuations your house has been monitoring. Searzek's expression shifted subtly, becoming more serious. She told you about that. Interesting. He glanced at Rias, who met his gaze steadily. Yes, I've been studying the patterns. They're troubling, but perhaps not a topic for a celebratory gathering. He smiled again, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. We'll have time to discuss such matters later. For now, enjoy the festivities. House Gremory's hospitality is legendary for good reason. With that, he moved away, rejoining the circulating guests with practiced ease. Your brother seems protective, Naruto observed. Rias sighed softly. Searzex takes his responsibilities very seriously. Both to our house and to me personally. He's also intensely curious about anything that might affect the balance of power in the underworld. She met Naruto's eyes directly. Your abilities at the trial definitely qualify. My father mentioned you've been investigating energy disturbances, Naruto said, keeping his voice low. Related to some kind of sealed temple in your territory. Her eyes widened slightly. Beelzebub told you. That's unexpected. The matter is somewhat sensitive. She glanced around the crowded salon, then back to him. Yes, we've been monitoring a situation that may require intervention. I had hoped to discuss it with you privately during your stay. Any particular reason you wanted my involvement specifically? A small smile played at her lips. Several, actually. The unique nature of your abilities, for one. The energy fluctuations we've detected don't match typical demonic signatures. They have a different quality to them. Something older. She hesitated. After seeing what you can do, I thought perhaps you might have insights others wouldn't. Before Naruto could respond, a chime sounded, signaling the start of the formal ceremony. Uests began moving toward the adjacent ceremonial hall, a tide of aristocratic demons in their finest attire. We'll continue this conversation later, Rias promised, placing her hand lightly on his arm. For now, I believe we're both expected to play our parts in this alliance ceremony. Naruto nodded, allowing himself to be guided toward the ceremonial hall. The political maneuvering was unfolding as his father had predicted, but there was something refreshingly direct about Rias's approach. Unlike most of the underworld nobility he'd encountered, she seemed genuinely interested in solving a problem rather than merely acquiring power or advantage. It was a quality that reminded him, unexpectedly, of his former self, of Naruto Uzumaki's straightforward determination to protect what mattered, regardless of politics or status. An unexpected warmth bloomed in his chest at the realization. Perhaps this alliance would prove interesting beyond mere political advantage after all. The ceremonial hall of House Gremory rivaled anything Naruto had seen in his father's domain. Vast and cathedral-like, with towering ceilings lost in shadow and walls lined with ancient sigils that pulsed with contained power. It projected an aura of age and authority that belied the house's outwardly warm reputation. At the center stood a circular dais surrounded by concentric rings of obsidian and marble, each inscribed with runes that glowed with inner fire. The lords and ladies of the attending houses arranged themselves according to rank and alliance, creating a living map of underworld politics. Naruto took his place slightly behind and to the right of his father, the traditional position for an heir during formal ceremonies. Across the dais, Rias stood in similar relation to Lord Gremory, her crimson hair a stark contrast to the midnight blue of her gown. When their eyes met briefly across the ceremonial space, Naruto detected a hint of amusement in her gaze, as though they shared a private understanding of the theatrical nature of these proceedings. Lord Gremory stepped forward onto the dais, his power manifesting as a subtle crimson aura that caused the nearby runes to pulse in response. For 3 millennia, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly throughout the hall. The great houses have maintained balance in the underworld. Through alliances and mutual respect, we have ensured prosperity and stability for all who dwell in our realm. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobility. Naruto noticed several representatives from minor houses exchanging glances, their expressions less convinced than their vocal assent might suggest. Today, Lord Gremory continued, we formalize an alliance between 2 of the eldest bloodlines, House Gremory and House Morningstar. Our strengths, united, will serve as a bulwark against those who would disturb the peace we have all worked to maintain. Beelzebub stepped forward to join him on the dais, his amber eyes gleaming in the ceremonial lights. House Morningstar brings power and ancient knowledge to this alliance, he stated, his melodious voice carrying an undercurrent of authority that silenced even the whispers among the crowd. Together, our houses will ensure that the traditions that have served the underworld since the First War remain inviolate. Naruto caught the subtle messaging in their statements. A clear counter to Rizvim's calls for reformation and restructuring. This ceremony wasn't just about formalizing ties between their houses, it was a public declaration of opposition to House Lucifer's agenda. The ritual proceeded with both lords cutting their palms, allowing crimson droplets to fall onto the central rune of the dais. The blood sizzled as it made contact, the rune flaring with brilliance. Liant light that spread outward through the concentric circles, connecting and activating the entire array. A pulse of power swept through the hall, not hostile but unmistakably significant, the magic. Embodiment of a pact between great houses. Such alliances were binding in ways that went beyond mere politics. They created magical connections between territories and bloodlines that would persist for generations. As the light from the activated runes began to fade, Lord Gremory gestured for Rias to join them on the dais. After a momentary hesitation, Beelzebub did the same to Naruto. To further cement this alliance, Lord Gremory announced, "My daughter, Rias, heir to House Gremory, will work closely with Naruto Morningstar, heir to House Beelzebub, on matters of mutual interest and security." Naruto maintained his composure as he stepped onto the dais, though inwardly he noted the calculated nature of this additional declaration. By publicly linking the heirs, both houses were signaling a deeper commitment than a standard political alliance, one that invited speculation about potential future unions. Rias met his eyes as they stood facing each other on the dais, a hint of challenge in her gaze. She extended her hand, palm up, clearly expecting him to complete the gesture that their fathers had just performed. It wasn't strictly necessary for the heirs to blood bond during an alliance ceremony. That they were being asked to do so indicated how seriously both lords took this pact. Without hesitation, Naruto drew a small ceremonial dagger from his belt, slicing his palm cleanly before handing the blade to Rias. She did the same without flinching, then clasped her bleeding hand with his. The contact sent a jolt through Naruto's system, not just the expected magical resonance of blood mixing with blood, but something more personal and immediate. For a brief moment, he felt an echo of her essence, fierce pride tempered with genuine compassion, immense power held in careful check, and beneath it all, a loneliness he recognized all too well from his own experience. From the widening of her eyes, he suspected she'd glimpsed something similar from him, perhaps traces of his dual nature. The memories of another life that still influenced who he had become. The runes beneath their feet pulsed once more, sealing their blood pact as a corollary to their father's alliance. As they separated, Naruto noticed Rias flexing her fingers slightly, as though adjusting to some new sensation. "It is done," Lord Gremory declared. "Let all present bear witness to the alliance of House Gremory and House Morningstar. Bound by blood and magic in the sight of the assembled nobility of the underworld." The formal portion of the ceremony complete, the gathering transitioned to celebration. Servants appearing with goblets of rare wines and delicacies from various realms. Music began to play from an unseen source, the haunting melody unlike anything from the human world. As the assembled guests dispersed into conversational groups, Rias moved closer to Naruto, her voice pitched for his ears alone. "That was interesting. The blood bond doesn't usually feel quite so revealing." "I noticed," Naruto agreed, keeping his own voice low. "Did you see fragments?" she interrupted, her gaze intense. "Memories that shouldn't belong to you. Power that isn't purely demonic." She flexed her hand again. "The small wound already healing. It confirms what I suspected after seeing you at the trial." "And what was that?" Her lips curved in a small smile. "That you're as much an anomaly in this realm as I sometimes feel." She glanced around at the celebrating nobles, then back to him. "Once the formalities are concluded, meet me in the East Wing Library. There's something I need to show you regarding those energy fluctuations we discussed." Before he could respond, she was drawn away by a group of minor house representatives eager to curry favor with the Gremory heir. Naruto found himself similarly approached by various nobles, all suddenly interested in the son of Beelzebub now that he had demonstrated both power at the trial and political significance through the alliance. He navigated the social currents with practiced ease, all the while aware of his father's calculating gaze tracking his interactions from across the hall. Beelzebub had orchestrated this alliance for reasons beyond mere opposition to Riasvim's agenda, that much was clear. The question was how much of his father's plan aligned with Naruto's own developing interest in both House Gremory and its intriguing heir. As the celebration continued around him, Naruto's thoughts kept returning to that moment of connection when his blood had mingled with Rias's. There had been an unexpected resonance there. Something beyond the formal magic of the ceremony. A recognition, perhaps, between two beings who didn't quite fit the molds their births had cast for them. Whatever Rias wanted to show him in the library, he suspected it would lead to far more than a simple diplomatic assignment. Hours later, as the celebration began to wind down, Naruto made his way through the labyrinthine corridors of the Gremory Manor toward the east wing. The architecture was subtly disorienting, halls that seemed to stretch longer than physically possible, doorways that appeared only when approached from certain angles. Windows that showed vistas that couldn't possibly exist adjacent to one another. It was a common feature of great house domains, reality bent to accommodate power and preference, but House Gremory's version felt less overtly threatening than his father's palace, designed to intrigue rather than intimidate. The library, when he finally located it, defied his expectations. Rather than the somber repository of forbidden knowledge he'd anticipated, he found a circular chamber bathed in warm light from floating orbs that drifted near the ceiling like miniature suns. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, interrupted occasionally by comfortable reading nooks and study areas. The center of the room featured a large table crafted from what appeared to be a single slice of an enormous tree. Its surface polished to a mirror shine and inlaid with silver runes. Rias stood at this table, her formal gown replaced by more practical attire, fitted black pants and a crimson tunic, her hair pulled back from her face. She was studying several ancient-looking scrolls spread across the table's surface, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up as he entered, a flicker of relief crossing her features. "You found your way. Good. Our manor can be challenging for first-time visitors. It has character," Naruto replied, approaching the table. "What are you studying?" "Records from the First War," she said, gesturing to the scrolls, specifically, accounts of the sealing of entities too powerful to destroy. She tapped one particularly aged document. "This describes the Temple of Chains in our southeastern territory. It's one of 7 major seals created after the war to contain entities that predated Demonkant." Naruto leaned closer, studying the elaborate diagrams inscribed on the parchment. The seal design was complex, incorporating elements he recognized from his previous life's knowledge of Fuinjutsu alongside symbols unique to demonic magic. "This is what's weakening?" he asked. "Yes." Rias pushed aside the scrolls, revealing a map of the underworld beneath. Several locations were marked with glowing sigils, one pulsing with particular intensity. The Temple of Chains houses an entity called Moloch, a deity of sacrifice who feeds on life energy. According to the records, it was nearly unstoppable during the First War until the combined forces of several great houses managed to bind it. "And now the seal is failing," Naruto surmised. Rias nodded grimly. "For the past month, we've detected increasing energy fluctuations from the temple site. 2 weeks ago, a research team we sent to reinforce the seals disappeared. My brother led a follow-up expedition and found the outer seals completely eroded." She met his eyes directly. "Something is actively weakening the bindings, Naruto. This isn't natural deterioration. You think someone's trying to release this Moloch deliberately." The implications were disturbing. Such an entity could devastate the underworld if fully unleashed. "That's our working theory." She ran a hand through her crimson hair, a gesture of frustration. "The question is who, and why. Releasing an ancient god of sacrifice seems like a particularly poor strategy. Even for those seeking to disrupt the current order. Unless they believe they can control it," Naruto suggested, thinking of the countless times in his previous life when power seekers had attempted to harness forces beyond their understanding. Or use the chaos to advance some other agenda. Rias's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Like Rizvim's calls for reformation. A crisis that threatens all houses might create an opening for his proposed restructuring." "It's a possibility," Naruto agreed, though inwardly he wondered if the connection was too convenient. His father and Lord Gremory clearly wanted to position House Lucifer as the villain in current underworld politics, but Naruto's instincts, honed across 2 lifetimes, suggested the situation might be more complex. "What do you need from me? Specifically?" Rias straightened, her manner becoming more formal. "House Gremory requests your assistance in investigating the Temple of Chains and reinforcing the seals before Moloch can break free. Your unique abilities, particularly those you demonstrated at the trial, may be effective against energies that resist conventional demonic power. And our fathers approved this mission." A small smile played at her lips. "They approved our collaboration on matters of mutual security. I believe this qualifies." Her expression sobered. In truth, Naruto, I.R. requested you specifically because what little we know about Moloch suggests it feeds on demonic energy. Your power, it's different. It might be our best chance at containing this threat before it grows beyond our control. Naruto considered her words. The mission aligned with his father's instructions to represent House Morningstar's interests while building goodwill with their new allies. But here was clearly more at stake than political advantage. If an ancient deity escaped its bonds, the consequences would affect all realms, not just the political balance of the underworld. When do we leave? He asked. Relief flashed across Rias's features. Tomorrow at dawn. I've assembled a small team. Just my closest circle, demons I trust completely. The fewer who know about this mission, the better. She hesitated, then added. Some houses might prefer to study Moloch rather than reseal it. Power of that magnitude would be tempting to many. Naruto nodded his understanding. Politics never ceased, even in the face of potential catastrophe. I'll be ready at dawn. Is there anything specific I should prepare for? The temple is located in a remote region of our territory, a wasteland nothing has grown since Moloch was sealed there. The environment is hostile, and as we get closer to the temple itself, we can expect to encounter manifestations of Moloch's influence. She rolled up the scrolls with practiced efficiency. Beyond that, it's difficult to predict what we'll face. The records of the original sealing are incomplete, and none who participated in it still live. As she organized the materials, Naruto took the opportunity to study her more closely. Despite her youth, by demon standards, at least, Rias carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Yet there was none of the arrogant entitlement he often observed in those born to great houses. Instead, she projected a sense of responsibility toward her house, her people, and the task at hand. You've done this before, he observed. Led missions into dangerous territory. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his. I've earned my reputation, if that's what you're asking. Not all of it is exaggerated rumor. A hint of amusement colored her tone. Though I never did reject 72 suitors. The political fallout would have been unmanageable. So it was the Phoenix, Naruto said, matching her lighter tone. Her laugh was unexpected and genuine. Actually, yes, though, destroyed is an overstatement. I merely convinced it that our territory wasn't worth the trouble. She finished gathering the materials. Her expression turning serious again. Rest well tonight, Naruto Morningstar. Tomorrow we hunt a god. As Naruto left the library to prepare for the coming mission, he found him self-intrigued by the complexities of Rias Gremory. She navigated the political waters of the underworld with practiced skill, yet maintained a directness that was rare among the nobility. There was an authenticity to her that resonated with values he'd held in his previous life. Protect what matters, face threats directly, value allies for their character rather than their status. The coming expedition would test not just their combined abilities, but also the alliance their fathers had so carefully orchestrated. And perhaps, Naruto admitted to himself, it would clarify the unexpected connectee he'd felt when their blood had mingled during the ceremony. Some bonds, after all, went deeper than politics. Dawn in the underworld didn't bring the golden light of a rising sun. There was no sun in this realm, but rather a gradual lightening of the perpetual twilight, shadows receding as the ambient glow of the land itself intensified. Naruto stood in the courtyard of the Gremory estate, dressed for the expedition in practical attire that would allow freedom of movement while still bearing the colors of House Morningstar. He had informed his father of the mission the previous night, receiving Beelzebub's approval along with a warning to remember whose son you are when dealing with ancient powers. The subtext was clear. His father expected him to ensure House Morningstar benefited from whatever knowledge or power they discovered at the Temple of Chains. Rias arrived shortly after, accompanied by 4 others, her circle, as she had called them. She made brief introductions. Akano Himahima, a tall demoness with long black hair and violet eyes, apparently Rias's closest confidant. Kiba Yuto, a blonde swordsman whose relaxed demeanor belied the lethal grace with which he moved. Kaneko Tuju, a petite white-haired girl whose diminutive stature contrasted with the immense physical power Naruto sensed within her. And Gaspar Vladi, a nervous-looking youth with unusual eyes that seemed to flicker with spatial distortions when he blinked. "My team," Rias said simply. "Each chosen for specific abilities that complement my own. Together, we've handled situations that would challenge demons 3 times our age." Naruto nodded respectfully to each of them, noting the mixture of curiosity and wariness with which they regarded him. His performance at the trial had clearly made an impression. But trust would need to be earned. "Our transport will take us to the edge of the wasteland," Rias continued, gesturing toward what appeared to be a large carriage drawn by 6 nightmarish steeds with manes of flame. "From there, we proceed on foot. The temple's defensive perimeter reacts violently to most forms of transportation." The journey began in relative silence, the team clearly accustomed to working together while Naruto remained the outsider. As they left the cultivated grounds of the Gremory estate behind, the landscape gradually changed, lush gardens giving way to wilder territories, which in turn transformed into increasingly desolate terrain. By mid-morning, they had reached the edge of what could only be described as a wasteland. The carriage halted at an invisible boundary where vibrant plant life simply stopped, replaced by cracked earth and twisted, petrified remnants of what might once have been trees. The air itself felt different here, thinner somehow, with an acrid quality that made breathing slightly uncomfortable. "The desolation of Moloch," Rias said as they disembarked. "Nothing has lived here since the sealing. The very soil is poisoned with the entity's essence." Naruto extended his senses, feeling for the energy signatures that permeated the area. There was a wrongness to the ambient power, not simply destructive, but fundamentally opposed to life itself. It reminded him, disturbingly, of the sensation he'd felt when facing certain enemies in his previous existence, beings whose nature corrupted the very chakra around them. "How far to the temple?" he asked. "Approximately 6 hours on foot," Kiba answered, checking his weapons, an assortment of swords that seemed to shimmer in and out of visibility as he moved. "Assuming we don't encounter resistance." "We'll encounter resistance," Kaneko stated flatly, her voice surprisingly mature coming from such a youthful appearance. She sniffed the air, nose wrinkling in disgust. "It's awake, watching." Naruto glanced at Rias, who nodded grimly. "Moloch may be bound, but its awareness extends throughout the desolation. As we get closer, it will try to stop us, or corrupt us." Her gaze swept across her team. "Remember your training. Nothing you see or hear beyond this point is necessarily real. Trust only those standing beside you now." With that warning, they began their trek into the wasteland. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous as they proceeded, fissures opening in the earth without warning, rock formations that seemed to shift position when not directly observed. Pockets of air that burned the lungs or induced momentary disorientation. Naruto walked beside Rias, with Akeno and Kiba taking point while Kaneko and Gasper brought up the rear. The formation seemed practiced, suggesting this wasn't their first expedition into hostile territory. "Your team is impressive," Naruto commented after they'd been walking for nearly an hour. "They move like they've been fighting together for decades." Rias smiled slightly. "Quality over quantity. I prefer a small circle of absolutely trusted allies to a large entourage of questionable loyalty." She glanced at him. "It's unusual for a great house heir." "I know. Most prefer to surround themselves with sycophants and status symbols." "I don't think it's unusual," Naruto replied, thinking of his own experiences across 2 lives. "The strongest bonds come from genuine connection, not obligation or hierarchy." She studied him with renewed interest. "You sound like you speak from experience." Before he could respond, Akeno called out a warning from ahead. The group halted, gathering around what appeared to be the remains of a campsite, charred wood, scattered supplies, and disturbing dark stains on the cracked earth. "The research team?" Naruto asked, though he already suspected the answer. Rias knelt, examining what remained of a journal, its pages mostly burned away. "Yes, they made it this far at least." Her expression hardened as she picked up a broken pendant bearing the Gremory crest. "These were good people, scholars, not warriors." "There was combat," Kaneko observed, pointing to what looked K blast marks on a nearby rock formation. "They fought back. Against what?" Gasper asked, his voice quavering slightly as his unusual eyes darted nervously around the desolate landscape. As if in answer, a low moan emanated from somewhere in the distance, not from any specific direction, but seemingly from the wasteland itself. The sound raised the hairs on Naruto's neck, triggering memories of battlefields from his previous life where the dying and wounded cried out in anguish. "It begins," Rias said quietly. "Malek's first line of defense. Fear, doubt, despair. It will try to break our resolve before we ever reach the temple." She stood, her power manifesting as a crimson aura that pushed back against the oppressive atmosphere. "Stay close. Trust nothing you cannot verify with your own hands." They pressed onward, the wasteland growing ever more hostile. The moaning continued, sometimes rising to screams that seemed to contain words, pleas for help, cries of warning, the names of loved ones. Naruto recognized the psychological warfare for what it was, having faced similar tactics from enemies in his shinobi days. What concerned him more were the physical manifestations that began to appear as they ventured deeper into the desolation. Shadowy figures that flitted at the edges of vision. The ground occasionally rippling like liquid despite its parched, cracked appearance. And most disturbing, the increasing frequency of what looked like partial manifestations, misshapen limbs or distorted faces that emerged from solid rock before dissolving back into the landscape. Malek is testing the boundaries of its prison, Akeno observed, her hands crackling with what appeared to be demonic lightning as she eyed a particularly grotesque manifestation. "These are just fragments of its consciousness leaking through weakened seals. If fragments can do this to the environment," Kiba added grimly, "I don't want to imagine what the full entity could accomplish." As they approach, what Rias identified as the halfway point to the temple, the attacks intensified. No longer content with psychological pressure, Malek's fragments began to coalesce into more substantial forms, stead amalgamations of shadow and bone that lunged from behind rock formations or erupted from the cracked earth beneath their feet. The team fought with practiced coordination. Akeno's lightning obliterated the shadowy constructs. Kiba moved like a golden blur, his swords cleaving through manifested limbs with surgical precision. Kaniko's strength allowed her to literally shatter the larger constructs with her bare hands. While Gasper's unusual eyes seemed to temporarily freeze some attackers in place, making them vulnerable to his teammates' attacks. Rias herself commanded impressive destructive power, crimson energy that disintegrated whatever it touched, wielded with the precision of someone who had spent centuries honing their abilities. Naruto fought alongside them, using a combination of techniques from both his lifetimes. Shadow clones confused and divided the attackers, while his fusion of chakra and demonic energy proved particularly effective against Malek's constructs. The entities seemed to recoil from his attacks, as though his unique energy signature was anathema to their nature. After dispatching a particularly aggressive wave of manifestations, they paused to regroup. Rias approached Naruto, her expression thoughtful. "Your power affects them differently than ours," she observed. "They actively avoid your energy, while they seem almost eager to absorb conventional demonic attacks." Naruto nodded, having noticed the same pattern. "In my previous life, I encountered entities that fed on specific energy types. Some techniques were effective, others just made them stronger." He flexed his fingers, feeling the dual nature of his power flowing through them. "Whatever Malek is, it doesn't recognize my energy. It can't process it as food. Which makes you our most effective weapon when we reach the temple," Rias concluded. Her gaze was calculating, but not in the cold manner of his father or other underworld nobility. Rather, she seemed to be genuinely assessing their strategy based on new information. She was interrupted by a cry from Gasper, who had wandered slightly apart from the group. The young demon stood frozen, staring at something only he could see. His unique eyes wide with terror. "Gasper," Rias called sharply, moving toward him. "Remember your training. It's not real." But Gasper didn't seem to hear her. He reached out toward the empty air, his expression a mixture of longing and horror. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to leave you behind." Before anyone could reach him, the ground beneath Gasper's feet liquefied, pulling him downward with horrifying speed. In the span of seconds, he was submerged to his waist, his scream cutting off as the earth began to close over his chest. Naruto reacted instinctively, creating a shadow clone that grabbed Kaniko and flung her toward Gasper with precise calculation of force and trajectory. The small demoness understood immediately, tucking into a ball midair before extending at the last moment to grab Gasper's outstretched hand. Her immense strength allowed her to halt his descent momentarily, but the earth continued to pull at him, now trying to claim her as well. It's not just pulling him down, Akeno shouted, lightning crackling around her hands as she tried to target the animated earth without hitting her teammates. It's trying to absorb him. Naruto formed the hand signs for a technique he hadn't used since his previous life, channeling his unique energy. Earth release. Terra shield. He called, slamming his palm onto the ground. The Earth Suro, Nding Gasper and Kaneko momentarily solidified, its hungry pull interrupted by the infusion of energy it couldn't process. In that brief window, Kiba darted forward with supernatural speed, his sword cleaving through the hardened soil around their trapped companions. Together, they managed to extract Gasper, who was pale and shaking but physically unharmed. The ground where he had been trapped bled ominously before settling back into cracked stillness, as though digesting its disappointment. What happened? Rias demanded once they had retreated to safer ground, her voice stern but her hand gentle as she checked Gasper for injuries. I saw him, Gasper replied, still trembling. My father. He was calling to me, saying he'd been wrong to abandon me, that he wanted me back. Shame colored his features. I knew it couldn't be real, but for a moment, I wanted to believe it so badly. Malik preys on desire as much as fear, Rias said, her expression softening. It finds what you want most and uses it against you. She looked around at her team. This is why we train to recognize illusions. The closer we get to the temple, the more personalized the attacks will become. Naruto frowned, processing this information. An entity that could read desires and fears, that fed on life energy and could manipulate matter within its domain. Malik was beginning to sound less like a simp. The deity of sacrifice and more like a conceptual predator, something that existed to consume not just life but the very emotions that gave life meaning. We should keep moving, he suggested, sensing a shift in the wasteland's ambient energy. It's gathering power for something larger. Rias nodded in agreement, and they pressed onward with renewed caution. The attacks continued, growing more sophisticated with each encounter. What had begun as simple shadowy constructs evolved into detailed illusions tailored to each member of the party. Loved ones in peril, offers of power or knowledge, manifestations of past failures or future fears. Naruto found himself confronted by spectral versions of people from his previous life, Sasuke sneering at his weakness, Sakura turning away in disappointment, Kakashi shaking his head in regret at what his student had become. The illusions were remarkably accurate, suggesting Malik had somehow extracted these images from his own memories. Most disturbing was the appearance of a perfect replica of his father, Beelzebub, offering him greater power in exchange for abandoning the mission and releasing Malik. The entity had clearly identified the complex relationship Naruto had with his father in this life and sought to exploit it. Through discipline and mutual support, the team fought through these psychological assaults. Whenever one of them wavered, the others provided grounding, physical contact, shared experiences, reminders of their purpose. Naruto found himself impressed by the bonds between these demons, so different from the self-serving relationships that characterized much of underworld society. By late afternoon, they caught their first glimpse of the Temple of Chains, a massive structure rising from the center of the wasteland like a wound in reality itself. Unlike the elegant architecture of the great houses, the temple was deliberately discordant, its angles wrong in ways that hurt the eyes, its surface covered in chains of various sizes that seemed to pulse with suppressive energy. The primary seal, Rias explained as they paused to study the distant structure. 7 great houses contributed to its creation, each forging a chain of binding from their unique power. Together, they contain Malik's true form and consciousness. And they're failing, Akeno observed grimly, pointing to places where the massive chains had visibly corroded. Links dissolving into nothing as energy leaked through the gaps. Not just failing, Kiba added. Being actively sabotaged. He indicated what appeared to be deliberate damage to one of the larger chains, clean cuts that couldn't have occurred through natural deterioration. Rias's expression hardened. Someone has been here recently. She turned to Naruto. This confirms our suspicions. Malik isn't breaking free through its own power alone, it has help. Before they could discuss further implications, the ground beneath the temple began to tremble. The chains rattled against the structure's surface, links snapping with audible cracks that echoed across the wasteland. A column of oily black energy erupted from the temple's center, shooting upward into the twilight sky of the underworld. "It's happening now," Kaneko stated, her usual monotone tinged with alarm. "The final seal is breaking." "We're out of time," Rias said, her power flaring around her as she assessed the situation. "Forget the careful approach. We need to reach the temple immediately and reinforce the primary bindings before Moloch fully manifests." They abandoned caution for speed, racing across the remaining distance toward the temple. The wasteland itself seemed to rise against them, the ground buckling, fissures opening, petrified trees animating to block their path. What had been scattered? Manifestations coalesced into a small army of constructs, all converging to prevent them from reaching the temple. The team fought their way forward, their previous coordination evolving into something more fluid and instinctive. Naruto found himself automatically filling gaps in their defense, his shadow clones and energy techniques complementing their abilities as though they had trained together for years rather than hours. When they finally reached the base of the temple, they were confronted by a sight none of the scrolls had prepared them for. The main entrance, once sealed by multiple layers of protective magic, now gaped open like a wound, and standing before it were three figures in formal attire bearing the crests of minor underworld houses. House Vapula, House Vine, and House Bifrons, Rias identified, her voice cold with anger. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The central figure, a tall demon with features like chiseled granite, stepped forward. "Lady Gremory, this is unexpected." His gaze shifted to include the rest of the team, lingering on Naruto with particular interest. "And the son of Beelzebub as well. The rumors of your alliance were true, it seems." "Lord Astaroth," Rias acknowledged, her tone formal despite the circumstances. "You haven't answered my question. This temple is under House Gremory's protection. Your presence here is unauthorized and, given the state of the seals, highly suspicious." Astaroth smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "The old order changes, Lady Gremory. Some of us believe that change should be directed rather than merely reacted to." He gestured toward the leaking black energy. "Moloch is a power beyond conventional understanding. Rather than simply containing it, we intend to repurpose it." "You're insane," Akeno said flatly. "Moloch can't be controlled. It's a primordial entity of consumption. It exists to devour, not serve." "Such limited thinking," countered one of the other nobles, a willow. Why demoness whose features shifted subtly as she spoke. "With the right bindings, any power can be harnessed. House Lucifer has provided us with the means to redirect Moloch's hunger toward specific targets rather than indiscriminate feeding." Naruto's suspicions solidified at the mention of House Lucifer. "Raizvam put you up to this," he stated. "What did he promise you?" "Territory, power, positions in his new order, vision," Astaroth replied, his certainty chilling in its absolutism. "Lord Raizvam understands that the underworld has stagnated under the current regime. The great houses hoard power while minor houses fight for scraps." His gaze hardened. "Moloch will reset the balance. Once properly bound to our collective will, it will become the equalizer that the underworld has needed for millennia." Rias stepped forward, her power manifesting visibly around her form. "I'm offering you one chance to step aside and help us reseal this temple. Whatever Raizvam promised you, it's not worth the destruction Moloch will bring." Quote. Astaroth's response was a blast of demonic energy aimed directly at Rias. She deflected it with a shield of her own power, but the attack signaled the start of a new conflict, not just against Moloch's manifestations, but against fellow demons who had chosen to side with chaos. The battle split along natural lines, Rias and Akeno engaging Astaroth, while Kiba, Kaneko, and Gasper handled the other two nobles and their guards. Naruto found himself creating a path through the remaining constructs toward the temple entrance, recognizing that stopping Moloch's emergence took priority over the immediate skirmish. "Go," Rias called to him when she saw his intention. "We'll handle these traitors. Stop whatever they've started inside." Naruto nodded, summoning a dozen shadow clones to clear his path before sprinting into the gaping entrance of the Temple of Chains. The interior was a nightmare of non-Euclidean architecture, corridors that twisted back on themselves, staircases that led sideways as often as up or down, chambers whose dimensions seemed to change when viewed from different angles. Throughout the structure, massive chains ran along walls, floors, and ceilings, all converging toward what Naruto assumed was the central chamber. Many were visibly damaged or weakened, leaking the same oily black energy he had seen erupting from the temple. Following these chains inward, Naruto navigated the disorienting layout toward the heart of the structure. What he found there defied easy description. The central chamber was a vast space that seemed both larger than the temple itself and somehow compressed, as though reality struggled to contain what was held within. 7 enormous chains, each distinct in appearance and energy signature, converged on a central point where a swirling vortex of darkness pulsated with malevolent awareness. Around this vortex, arranged in a complex magical array, were what appeared to be sacrificial offerings, personal items, vials of blood, and most disturbingly, several bodies in various states of dissolution, their energy being steadily drained into the growing darkness. And standing before this grotesque scene, manipulating what could only be described as anti-seals, constructs designed to unravel binding magic, was a figure Naruto recognized immediately, Valley Lucifer. I wondered if they'd send someone capable of understanding what's happening here, Valley said without turning, apparently having sensed Naruto's arrival. Though I admit, I expected Rias Gremory, not Beelzebub's enigmatic son. Step away from the seal, Valley, Naruto ordered, his unique energy gathering around him in preparation for conflict. Whatever Riasvam told you about controlling Moloch, it's a lie. That thing will consume everything once it's free. Valley turned then, his expression not the arrogant smirk Naruto expected but something more complex, determination tinged with what might have been regret. You think I don't know that? You think any of us are that naive? He gestured toward the vortex. Moloch isn't the goal, Morningstar. It's the catalyst. Catalyst for what? Reformation. True change. Valley's sacred gear manifested, white light enveloping his form. The great houses have maintained their power for millennia through artificial stability. They contain threats rather than eliminating them, preserve problems rather than solving them. All to justify their continued dominance. So you'll release an ancient god of sacrifice to, what, shake things up? Naruto took a step forward, his own power rising to match Valley's. How many innocent demons will die in your reformation? Fewer than have suffered under the current regime across thousands of years. Valley's expression hardened. My father has a plan. Moloch will be released in a controlled manner, directed toward specific targets. The resulting chaos will necessitate a new power structure, one that distributes authority more equitably among all houses. And puts House Lucifer at the top, Naruto countered. Convenient. A flicker of doubt crossed Valley's features, quickly suppressed. Every revolution needs leadership. House Lucifer has the vision and strength to guide the underworld through the coming changes. Before Naruto could respond, a tremor ran through the temple, causing dust and stone fragments to rain down from the ceiling. The vortex at the center of the chamber pulsed violently, expanding outward as one of the massive chains snapped completely, its broken ends withering like dying vines. It's too late to stop the process, Valley said, a note of satisfaction entering his voice despite the danger. The anti-seals are self-sustaining now. Moloch will emerge within the hour. Naruto assessed the situation rapidly, drawing on both his shinobi training and his knowledge of demonic sealing. The anti-seals Valley had established were indeed complex and self-reinforcing, designed to systematically dismantle the original binding magic. But they weren't impenetrable. There's always a way to stop a process, Naruto said, forming a familiar hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Dozens of perfect duplicates appeared throughout the chamber, each moving to a different position around the central vortex. Valley reacted immediately, his sacred gear flaring as he launched himself toward what he assumed was the real Naruto. Divine dividing, he called, wings of light extending from his back as he had during their duel at the trial. Whatever you're planning won't work. But Naruto had anticipated this reaction. As Valley engaged what he thought was the original, the real Naruto and several clones began a complex sequence of hand signs, channeling their unique energy into the remains of the original sealing array. You don't understand what I am, Valley, Naruto said, his voice echoing from multiple sources as his clones continued their work. In my previous life, I was a Jinchuriki, a human vessel containing a tailed beast. I understand seals that contain entities of pure destructive power better than anyone in the underworld. Valley destroyed several clones with precise strikes of his light-infused power, but for each one eliminated, another took its place, continuing the sealing sequence. Previous life, he questioned, momentary confusion crossing his features. What are you talking about? I died as Naruto Uzumaki, shinobi of the Hidden Leaf. Naruto explained, his real body now channeling golden energy into one of the intact chains while his clones handled the others. I was reborn as Naruto Morningstar. But I carried knowledge with me, including how to contain beings that feed on energy. The remaining chains began to glow with renewed power as Naruto's unique energy, part chakra, part demonic, flowed into them. Where the original seals had used purely demonic power, which Moloch could eventually corrupt and consume, Naruto's energy was fundamentally different, the chakra component creating a ending that the entity couldn't process or break down. Realizing what was happening, Valley abandoned his attack on the clones and dove toward the central vortex, his sacred gear blazing. I can't let you do this, he shouted, gathering what appeared to be a massive concentration of divine power between his hands. Divine retribution. The blast tore through the chamber, destroying multiple shadow loans and disrupting Naruto's sealing process. The vortex pulsed victoriously, expanding further as another chain began to crack under the strain. Naruto gritted his teeth, adapting his strategy. Dire court confrontation with Valley would waste precious time. He needed to complete the modified seal before Moloch fully emerged, which meant neutralizing Valley quickly. Drawing on memories of his former life, Naruto formed a series of hand signs rarely used in the underworld. Sealing technique. Phantom chains. Ethereal bindings erupted from the floor beneath Valley, wrapping around his limbs and wings. Unlike conventional restraints, these incorporated principles from his previous life's Fuinjutsu. They didn't just restrict movement but temporarily sealed the target's ability to channel power. Valley Street. Rugged against the unexpected technique, his sacred gear flickering as the phantom chains disrupted his connection to its power. What is this? He demanded, genuine shock in his voice. This isn't demonic magic. No, Naruto agreed, focusing on the central vortex once more. It's something older, something Moloch hasn't adapted to consume. With Valley temporarily restrained, Naruto redirected his shadow clones to the sealing process. Each positioned themselves at key points in the chamber, channeling their unique energy into what remained of the original binding array while simultaneously creating a new layer of seals based on principles from the shinobi world. The vortex of darkness that was Moloch's partial manifestation reacted violently, tendrils of oily energy lashing out at the clones. Some were destroyed, dissipating in puffs of smoke, but the sealing process continued uninterrupted as new clones replaced them. You don't understand what you're preventing, Valley called, struggling against the phantom chains. The underworld needs this catalyst. The great houses won't change without being forced. Maybe, Naruto conceded, never pausing in his work. But releasing an entity that feeds on life itself isn't revolution, it's annihilation. There are better ways to create change. As the new sealing array began to take shape, incorporating elements of both demonic magic and shinobi fuinjutsu, the temple trembled again. This time, however, it wasn't from Moloch's attempts to break free, but from conflict outside. Rias burst into the chamber, her clothing torn and singed but her power blazing around her like crimson flames. Naruto, she called, taking in the scene with a strategic eye. The others are holding the entrance, but more of Lucifer's supporters have arrived. We don't have much time. Her gaze fixed on Valley, recognition and disappointment flashing across her features. So it was you all along. Does your father know what you've done here? The lives you've sacrificed? Valley's expression hardened. Everything I've done has been with his full knowledge and approval. House Lucifer doesn't fear necessary sacrifice for greater purpose. I'm nearly finished, Naruto told Rias. The modified sealing array now glowing with a mixture of golden chakra and crimson demonic energy. But the new seal will need anchoring. It's different from the original. It needs living conduits to stabilize initially. Understanding dawned in Rias's eyes. You need demons to serve as temporary anchors for the seal. Yes, 2 should be sufficient. 1 with convention. Demonic power to interface with what remains of the original bindings, and 1 with my kind of energy, to establish the new elements. Me and you, Rias concluded without hesitation. What do we need to do? Before Naruto could explain, Valley gave a final tremendous effort against his restraints. The phantom chains shattered as he channeled a desperate surge of power through his sacred gear. Its light momentarily blinding in the dim chamber. I can't let you reseal it, he shouted, launching himself toward the center of Naruto's array. Too much depends on this. Rias reacted instantly, crimson energy coalescing into a concentrated beam that intercepted Valley mid-flight. The impact sent him crashing into one of the chamber walls, but he recovered quickly, his sacred gears light intensifying as he prepared for another attack. Handle the seal, Rias told Naruto, stepping between him and Valley. I'll keep him busy. What followed was a spectacular display of power as Rias and Valley clashed, their energies illuminating the chamber in alternating flashes of crimson and white. Despite her relative youth, Rias proved herself a formidable opponent, her control and tactical thinking compensating for Valley's raw power advantage. Meanwhile, Naruto and his remaining clones completed the modified sealing array. Unlike the original, which had relied solely on the power of 7 great houses channeled into physical chains, Naruto's version incorporated principles of balance and harmony from his shinobi training. Rather than simply containing Moloch through brute suppression, the new seal would establish a cycle of energy that perpetually redirected the entity's consumption back upon itself, a closed loop that would prevent it from ever gathering enough power to break free again. It's ready, Naruto called to Rias as the array reached completion. We need to take positions on opposite sides of the vortex. Rias disengaged from her battle with Valley, who was showing signs of fatigue despite his sacred gear's power. She moved quickly to the position Naruto indicated, her crimson energy already adapting to interface with the modified seal. What now? She asked, her voice STE 80 despite the strain evident in her posture. Channel your power into the array, Naruto instructed, taking his own position. Don't resist when you feel the seal drawing on your essence, it needs to establish the initial connection through us before it becomes self-sustaining. As they began the process, Valley made one final desperate attempt to disrupt the sealing. Gathering what appeared to be the last of his strength, he directed a concentrated blast of his sacred gear's energy not at Naruto or Rias, but at the chamber's ceiling above them. If I can't stop you directly, he snarled, I'll bring this entire temple down on your heads. The blast connected with devastating effect, massive chunks of stone crashing down toward the ceiling array. Naruto, fully committed to maintaining the delicate balance of energies in the seal, couldn't defend against the falling debris without risking the entire process. In that critical moment, Rias made a split-second decision. Keeping one hand extended toward the seal to maintain her connection, she used her other to create a shield of crimson energy above them, deflecting the worst of the falling stones. The effort cost her focus on the sealing process, however, causing the array to fluctuate dangerously. Rias, Naruto called in warning as he sensed the imbalance. The seal needs your full power. If I drop the shield, we'll be crushed before the seal completes. She replied, visibly straining to maintain both protections simultaneously. Recognizing the impossible position, Naruto made the only choice available. He channeled more of his own energy into the array, attempting to compensate for the power Rias had diverted to their protection. It was a dangerous gamble. The seal required balance between conventional demonic energy and his unique power. Too much of either would cause it to collapse entirely. The vortex of darkness that was Moloch sensed the opportunity, surging against the partially formed bindings. Tendrils of oily blackness lashed out, one wrapping around Naruto's extended arm, burning like acid where it touched his skin. Pain lanced through him, but he maintained his focus, drawing deeper on the reserves of power he had inherited from his previous life. Golden energy erupted around his form, the echo of the Nine Tails chakra manifesting as a protective cloak that pushed back against Moloch's corruption. Hold on, he called to Rias, seeing her struggle to maintain both the shield and her connection to the seal. Just a few more seconds. With a final surge of effort, Naruto channeled everything he had into the array, not just his demon power and the echo of the Nine Tails, but the very essence of his dual nature, the unique existence that bridged two lives across different realms. The seal responded, flaring with blinding light as it synchronized with his energy signature. The vortex of darkness contracted violently, tendrils retracting as new bindings, not physical chains this time but RNS of pure energy, wrapped around Moloch's manifestation. The entity fought with the desperation of a predator sensing imprisonment, but the modified seal held firm, gradually compressing the darkness back toward the center of the chamber. As the sealing neared completion, Naruto felt an unexpected connection forming, not just between himself and the array, but with Rias as well. Their energies, channeled through the seal, resonated with each other in a way that transcended physical proximity. He could sense her determination, her concern for her team waiting outside, her growing fatigue as she maintained both the shield and her part in the sealing. And beneath it all, a genuine admiration for his willingness to risk himself for a realm that wasn't truly his own, a house that wasn't his by birth but by circumstance. The final phase of the sealing manifested as a shockwave of purified energy that swept outward from the compressed vortex, racing along the walls and ceiling of the chamber before reverberating back inward. When it reached the center again, there was a moment of perfect stillness, then the darkness that was Moloch collapsed in on itself, compressed to a sphere no larger than a clenched fist. Suspended within a complex web of golden and crimson energy that pulsed with self-sustaining rhythm. The seal was complete. Exhausted, Naruto sank to one knee, the golden cloak fading from around his form. Across the chamber, Rias lowered her shield as the last of the debris settled, her own power receding to a subtle aura as fatigue took its toll. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice hoarse from exertion. Naruto nodded, studying the suspended sphere with professional assessment. "The new seal is stable, self-sustaining. It won't require external maintenance like the original." "Impressive work," came a voice from the chamber entrance. "Though I can't say I approve of the outcome." They turned to find Valley leaning against the doorway, his sacred gear deactivated, blood trickling from a cut above one eye. Despite his apparent defeat, his expression held more resignation than anger. "It's over, Valley," Rias said firmly, straightening despite her fatigue. "Moloch is sealed more securely than before. Whatever Rizvam planned has failed. This operation, perhaps." Valley pushed himself away from the doorframe, wincing slightly at some hidden injury. "But my father's vision for the underworld won't be so easily contained." His gaze shifted to Naruto. "You continue to surprise me, Morningstar. Those techniques, they're not from any demonic tradition I recognize." "Because they're not demonic in origin," Naruto replied simply, rising to his feet despite the bone-deep weariness that accompanied using so much of his unique energy. "There are more things in existence than the underworld accounts for. Valley." A humorless smile curved Valley's lips. Evidently, he straightened, attempting to recover some dignity despite his defeated state. "This isn't the end. Use Lucifer has other catalysts in motion. The old order will change, whether through Moloch or by other means." "If you want change," Naruto countered, "there are better ways than unleashing ancient horrors. Ways that don't involve sacrificing innocent lives." Something flickered in Valley's eyes, perhaps doubt, perhaps merely calculation. "An interesting perspective from the son of Beelzebub. I wonder if your father shares your concern for innocent lives." With that parting shot, he turned and limped from the chamber, presumably to rejoin whatever forces remained of his operation. Rias moved to Naruto's side, her expression a mixture of triumph and concern. "Should we stop him? He's in no condition to threaten the seal," Naruto assessed. "And capturing the heir to house Lucifer would create more problems than it solves right now." He glanced at the suspended sphere of darkness, now securely bound by the modified seal. "Besides, we have wounded to tend to, and explanations to prepare. This isn't a victory Rizvam will accept quietly." Rias nodded, then surprised him by taking his hand, examining the burns where Moloch's essence had touched him. "You were injured. It'll heal," he assured her, though the wounds did burn with unusual intensity. "Hazard of the job." Her eyes met his, serious despite her exhaustion. "What you did, modifying an ancient seal on the fly, using technique UES unknown to Demunkand, it was remarkable." A small smile curved her lips. "And what I sensed when our energies connected through the seal, you truly are unique, Naruto Morningstar." Before he could respond, the rest of her team arrived at the chamber entrance, battered and weary but victorious. Akano supported a limping Kiba, while Kaneko carried an unconscious Gasper over her shoulder despite her diminutive size. The Lucifer supporters retreated when they felt the sealing complete, Akeno reported. Astaroth and the others fled with them. Cowards, all of them. Not cowards, Rias corrected. Strategic. They'll regroup and report to Riasvum. She glanced around the chamber, at the modified seal floating serenely at its center, at the shattered remains of the original chains lying useless on the floor. This will have political repercussions beyond anything we anticipated when we set out this morning. House Lucifer attempted to release a sealed horror for political gain, Kiba noted grimly. That's grounds for censure by the Council of Great Houses. If we can prove it was officially sanctioned, Rias qualified. Riasvum will claim Valley acted independently, that these minor houses were rogue elements. She sighed, the weight of political reality settling onto her shoulders. It will be our word against theirs, and many houses are already sympathetic to Riasvum's calls for reformation. Naruto considered this reality check against the victory they had just achieved. Politics never ceased in the underworld, not even in the face of existential threats. It was a reality he had come to accept since his rebirth into this realm, though part of him, the part that still thought like Naruto Uzumaki, chafed at the endless calculations and positioning. We have the modified seal as evidence, he pointed out, and witnesses from multiple houses. It may not be enough to formally censure House Lucifer, but it will make others think twice about allying with Riasvum. Rias nodded slowly, her tactical mind clearly processing the political angles. True, and the alliance between our houses is now strengthened by shared combat. She smiled slightly, fatigue softening her usual formality. My father will be pleased, if not by the specific circumstances. As will mine, Naruto agreed, though with considerably less enthusiasm. Beelzebub would undoubtedly see opportunities in this confrontation, advantages to be pressed and leveraged in the ongoing game of underworld politics. But as they gathered their wounded and prepared to leave the Temple of Chains, Naruto found his thoughts less on political implications and more on the connection he had felt with Rias during the sealing, the resonance between their energies, the mutual respect that had flowed alongside power thr. Out the array they had created together. It was a connection that transcended the political alliance their fathers had arranged, something genuine that had formed in the crucible of shared danger and purpose. Whether that connection would survive the political machinations that would inevitably follow remained to be seen. But for the moment, as they emerged from the temple into the wasteland Bayo. ND, a wasteland that already seemed less hostile with Moloch securely bound, Naruto allowed himself to appreciate the simple satisfaction of a threat contained, a battle won, and allies who had proven their worth. Some things, it seemed, remained constant across lifetimes. The journey back to Gremory territory was considerably less eventful than their outbound expedition. With Moloch securely sealed, and its influence over the surrounding wasteland diminished, the landscape itself seemed less actively hostile. The twisted manifestations no longer appeared, and even the air felt less caustic in their lungs. They traveled in relative silence, each processing the implications of what they had witnessed and participated in. The alliance between their houses, formally established just the day before, had already been tested in combat against a faction led by one of the great houses. Such a development would send ripples throughout underworld politics for decades, if not centuries, to come. Upon their return to the Gremory estate, they were immediately summoned to a private council with Lord Gremory, Lady Venilana, Searsex, and, to Naruto's mild surprise, his father. Beelzebub lounged in an ornate chair as they entered the council chamber, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts on the day's events. You've had an eventful first day as allies, Lord Gremory observed dryly as EY finished recounting their experiences at the Temple of Chains. House Lucifer's involvement is troubling, if not entirely unexpected. Riasvum grows bold, Beelzebub commented, his tone casual despite the gravity of the situation. Using an ancient horror as a political tool shows either remarkable ambition or remarkable foolishness. His gaze settled on Naruto. Though I admit some curiosity about this modified seal you've created, my son. You've never mentioned an aptitude for such advanced binding techniques. Naruto met his father's gaze steadily. It was knowledge I retained from my previous existence. Adaptable to our current reality, as it turns out. Beelzebub's eyes narrowed slightly, but he merely nodded, filing this information away for future consideration. Fortuitous timing for such knowledge to resurface. The immediate question, Searsex interjected, is how we respond to this provocation. House Lucifer has effectively declared opposition to our alliance through their actions. Whether they admit responsibility or not, we have witnesses, Rias pointed out. 3 minor houses, Vapula, Vine, and Bifrons, openly admitted to working with Rizvim's guidance. And Valley Lucifer himself was caught in the act of dismantling the original seal. Witnesses can be discredited, Lady Venelana said softly. Minor houses pressured into retracting statements. And Valley could claim independent action. Use folly rather than house policy. Lord Gremory nodded in agreement with his wife's assessment. Politics in the underworld rarely proceeds along clean lines of evidence and accusation. Rizvim will have prepared his defense before his supporters ever set foot in that temple. Then we strengthen our position, Naruto suggested, drawing on both his current political understanding and the strategic thinking he had developed in his previous life. The alliance between our houses was timely, but we need more than a formal pact. We need to demonstrate tangible benefits that other houses might wish to share in. Beelzebub's lips curved in a small smile of approval. My son makes a valid point. Alliances thrive on mutual advantage displayed prominently. Perhaps a more personal connection between our houses would send the appropriate message. The subtext was unmistakable, and Naruto felt a flicker of irritation at his father's presumption. Beelzebub orchestrated this alliance from the beginning, clearly with an eye toward eventually proposing a union between the heirs. That he would suggest it so blatantly now, immediately following a crisis, spoke to his opportunistic nature. To Naruto's surprise, Rias spoke before anyone else could respond to Beelzebub's suggestion. If by personal connection, you're implying an arranged marriage, Lord Beelzebub, I would remind you that such arrangements require the consent of all parties. Her tone was respectful but firm. While today's events have certainly strengthened the bonds between our houses, such significant decisions should not be made in the immediate aftermath of crisis. Naruto glanced at her with newfound appreciation. Few demons would speak so directly to one of the great lords. Especially on a matter of political advantage. That Rias would do so, defending not just her own autonomy but his as well, spoke volumes about her character. Rather than taking offense, Beelzebub head, a melodious sound that nonetheless carried an edge of dangerous amusement. Well said, Lady Rias. I meant no disrespect to your independence. Merely observing that our enemies will be watching for signs of commitment beyond formal declarations. His gaze shifted between Rias and Naruto, calculating. Whatever form that commitment takes should, of course, develop naturally. Lord Gremory cleared his throat, clearly sensing the underlying tensions. For now, we should focus on securing our position against further provocations from House Lucifer. The modified seal at the Temple of Chains must be protected, and we should prepare for political challenges at the next Council of Great Houses. The discussion turned to practical matters of security and alliance building, with various strategies proposed and evaluated. Throughout the council, Naruto remained aware of his father's periodic glances, assessing, calculating, recalibrating whatever long-term plan Beelzebub had set in motion by proposing the alliance in the first place. He was equally aware of Rias beside him, her composure restored after the exhaustion of the sealing, her contributions to the strategic discussion insightful and pragmatic. The connection he had felt during the creation of the modified seal lingered like an echo, a resonance between their energies that transcended the political machinations surrounding them. As the council concluded and the participants began to disperse, Rias caught his eye, a subtle gesture indicating he should remain behind. When they were alone in the